All right, everybody, welcome back to Making the Argument. We've got a good one for you today. We're going to go through a list, not a comprehensive list, but a list of some of the most prominent people that used to be on the left, like well-respected, some of them adored by the left, who have since been red-pilled. And what we're going to talk a little bit today is like, where were they at? Like, where were they at ideologically, philosophically? And then what was that red pill moment? Right? Or what was that series of red pill moments? And then we're going to ask a very important question, because there are some people that get legit red pilled, which is to say they were on one place, something happened that changed their perspective, they did a deep dive, and now they are in somewhere completely different. There's other places where it's just kind of this argument, well, I didn't leave the left left me. Okay, look, I can appreciate it when someone has recognized that maybe something has gone too far. But if you don't truly recognize kind of the philosophical underpinning of what's going on and why, then I'm not going to say, I might say welcome, right? But I'm not saying, okay, now you get to be in charge of everything. And quite frankly, we have some people that jump the gun just a little bit too much on people that have not quite been red-pilled. So what are we going to discuss? We're going to go over the major figures that have been, quasi-red-pilled. We're going to talk about what that moment was that caused it for them, because there's a lot of useful information in understanding what it takes to get somebody to really kind of change their worldview. And then we're going to ask the question, do they really recognize where the problem was, or did things just get a little bit too crazy in one area? All of that and more coming up on this episode of Making the Argument, brought to you by Good Ranchers.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'm sure this is going to be a great episode, and I'm going to learn a lot, but I'm sure there's also going to be a great conversation about this topic in our community chat starting right after the episode. If you haven't already, go down to the link in the description, join our community chat, introduce yourself. We look forward to getting to know you there.
Okay, as always, I am your host, Nick Freitas. Not with us today is my beautiful bride, Tina, Queen of the Bees, but she will be returning. So as concerned as many of you were that she went out to get milk and never came back, she is going to be coming back, and we'll be in the studio hopefully shortly. And then we have our political prognosticator, our resident historian, and 1 year older, Master Hines. Happy birthday, Christian.
Thank you. I turned 30 today.
Wow. This is the part where people start to kind of take you seriously.
I don't know if you're ever going to take me seriously, considering that I met you when I was in high school. Here's a fun fact for you. I have now known you for almost half of my life. I think I met you when I was 16.
Wow.
So almost half of my life now.
Almost there. That's a lot of good influence on your upbringing.
This is going to be a really, really fun episode for my 30th birthday. I was up here until like 3:30 last night in the morning building the outline for today's episode. I'm like super excited. This might be like up there with the right-wing backlash one that we did last year in terms of like my all-time favorite.
We're turning this into your birthday present. Like, look at what we did. See all this work you did? Happy birthday.
A gift to our audience. This might run a little bit longer than normal because we got a lot of people to go through.
And then, of course, we have our producer of producers, Nicholas Hamilton, the good Hamilton, the one that doesn't like central banking.
Happy birthday, Christian. Let's get right into it.
Thanks, Hamilton.
So let's talk a little bit about kind of where we're coming from here. Now, there's this saying by a guy, Bill Kristol, right, who used to be on the left and then went to the right, and now he's kind of gone back to the left, right? But he used to say that a conservative or maybe a conservative that is a recent convert to conservatives is someone that's been mugged by reality. And what we're going to go through is we go through these names. We're not going to lead off with who the name is first. We're going to give you a description of where they used to be politically and kind of where they were on the spectrum of leftist ideology and how well they might have been respected within a particular community. We're going to go through that first, and then we're going to tell you who it is, and then we're going to talk a little bit about their red pill journey and where they're at right now. So let's go ahead and start off with our first person. So this person started off in something of a Christian household, actually went through confirmation as a young child. But he was unimpressed. He had this moment where he had a discussion with a priest and was asking questions about creation versus evolution, and he just was not at all impressed with the answers that the priest was giving him, and it really caused him to not just challenge his faith, but somewhat outright reject it. He proceeded to go on to kind of an intellectual journey over the problem of evil and came to the conclusion that economic injustice was at the root of all evil and that socialism was the best way to counter it. And he believed this so much that he actually became very active in the New Democratic Party and left-wing socialist parties. And we are, of course, talking about Jordan Peterson, right? So it's not that Jordan Peterson was just kind of like a center-left academic somewhere. Like, he was hardcore, bought into kind of the Marxist argument for what's wrong with the world, and decided to like actively dedicate his time to fostering this idea of socialism as the way to bring about economic justice and therefore greater social justice. And it was interesting. He was serving, I think, on the board of governors for a university, and it was his first taste of getting to know people that disagreed with him ideologically, but that he respected both intellectually and respected kind of their mindset and the way that they looked at the world. And even though they were highly successful, he was impressed with them as being people that had earned that success. And then he contrasted that with some of the people that he had worked with in the socialist movement, who he thought were just, when it came down to it, fundamentally kind of greedy and not very active and envious. And because he was so dedicated to this notion of understanding various mass movements within history that had caused people or had encouraged people or convinced people to engage in hellacious acts, atrocities, genocide, he was really focused on this idea of, okay, like, how do we prevent that? How do we steel civilization, against that sort of mindset? And he saw that mindset being kind of articulated and carried out within the various groups that he had associated himself with. And so that was kind of the beginning of his intellectual journey. But obviously, when Bill C-16, was proposed in Canada, this is where he gained kind of national attention, where he stepped out as a college professor and said, this is wrong. This is compelled speech. He goes, this isn't just the government saying you can't say something. This is the government telling me I must say something, that I must affirm something that I do not believe is true. And it was like this light bulb went off of all of the study, all of the research he had done on these mass movements, on the Nazis, on fascists, on communists. It was like, this is where it starts. It starts off with this moment of compelled speech. You must believe something. You must say something. You must affirm something you don't believe to be true. And if you don't, there will be punishment for it. And he absolutely set his foot down and said, I will not comply with this. And of course, the usual suspects came out. Oh, you're just a bigot. You're just a racist. You're just mean to trans people. And he goes, it has nothing to do with what an individual trans person might request of me. It has everything to do with what the government will coerce and compel me and punish me if I don't do. And that's the line in the sand. And as hard as they tried to paint him as just some sort of like right-wing nut job, we all got introduced to the Jordan Peterson that we all know now, who has the ability to incredibly and effectively articulate his position in a way that just decimated everyone that tried to make him look like a crazy person. And I think you've got...
I got a couple clips that I want to show people. Everybody remembers the Cathy Newman interview from many years ago. Yeah. That alongside with Bill C-16 was the thing that made him famous. But there's a very small part of that interview with Cathy Newman that didn't get as much press as the one where he's pushing back at her and he's like, well, you're making me feel uncomfortable. By what right do you have to do that? Turning the tables on the whole free speech argument. But after that exchange, she kind of puts him in this, really difficult position where she's saying, you're telling me that trans activists are the equivalent of Chairman Mao, who killed millions of people. And then he says, like, well, why not? And she's like thinking like, oh, I've got him right now. And then he just dismantles her argument in just a few seconds. So take a listen to this.
Under Mao, millions of people died.
Right.
I mean, there's no comparison between Mao and a trans activist, is there?
Why not?
Because trans activists aren't killing millions of people?
The philosophy that's guiding their utterances is the same philosophy.
The consequences are...
Not yet.
You're saying that trans activists could lead to the deaths of millions of people?
I'm saying that the philosophy that drives their utterances is the same philosophy that already has driven us to the deaths of millions of people.
She did this entire interview. She would say, he would say something, and then she would respond with, so you're saying this, and it was never what he was actually saying. And it became so abundantly clear to anybody that was willing to watch this with an open mind that she came into this not trying to probe Jordan Peterson for what he really believed, but rather trying to catch him in a gotcha moment, to try to make him look, again, mean-spirited, make him look idiotic, made him look ignorant. And every step of the way, Jordan crushed it, not by giving what we've kind of become accustomed to seeing from a lot of people on the right, if we're being honest, which is just responding with anger and you're being an idiot, but instead opening up the questioner within their own presuppositions. Mm-hmm. Like the clip that really went viral on this was when she said, so you're saying that, why does your right to say what you want trump a trans person's right to feel safe? And his response was, well, in order to actually, question something and get to the bottom of something, you have to risk offense. He goes, for instance, you've been asking me a lot of questions that I found it very uncomfortable. What gives you the right to do that? And she was stumped. And she said, well, I'm just trying to unpack that. And he's like, I gotcha. She goes, yeah, you did get me. She at least admitted that.
Listen to the next about 20 seconds of this, because when she asks, she puts him up and she's like, you're telling me that this is the same thing as Mao. And he's like, no, it's the same logic. And then she says, well, explain how.
Yeah.
This is the part that he used his years of experience as a clinical psychologist and as a college professor that taught psychology to unpack basically the ideological origins of a lot of the identity politics movements. And when I listen to this clip here, which again doesn't get as much press as the other parts of this interview, that's when it started dawning on me that like Peterson understands why we're living in clown world now. And it was clear to me that already by like 2017, he was starting to get red pilled. He might have not fully gone all the way to the right? But like he was already moving in that direction. So just listen to the end of this here.
Tell us how that philosophy is in any way comparable.
Sure, that's no problem. The first thing is that the philosophy presumes that group identity is paramount. That's the fundamental philosophy that drove the Soviet Union and Maoist China. And it's the fundamental philosophy of the left-wing activists. It's identity politics. It doesn't matter who you are as an individual. It matters who you are in terms of your group identity.
You're just saying these things, though, to provoke, aren't you?
So, I mean, what he points out there is that these people prioritize group identity over all else. And when you subsume individual identity in favor of the collective, and when I say in favor of the collective, I don't mean that identities or groups have no value or matter. Concepts like the family or the church or the nation, those are incredibly important. But when you place individual identity at the bottom of that totem pole, well, suddenly you end up falling into almost like a slave-like, cult-like devotion towards whatever the group identity, whoever controls the group identity is. And this is a very common thing that you see in, quite frankly, a lot of Marxist regimes. You also see it in some, quote-unquote right-wing regimes like Nazi Germany, for example, right? It's the German people are underneath this concept of, the Aryans that the Nazis came up with and again, push a sense of group identity, obedience towards the state, so to speak. And again, it's through so much of his own work and investigations into what is evil, what makes evil manifest in the world, that allowed him to realize, no, this is actually incredibly dangerous. And the very ideology that I used to belong to as a member of the NDP is, if put into practice and taken to its logical endpoint, the very ideology that has led to 100 million deaths in the 20th century alone.
One of the most important things that I think Jordan Peterson articulates and has uncovered is this idea that if you actually want the sort of evil manifested in like mass genocide, that's not done simply because someone has a quest for power or for wealth or whatever it is. If you really want to convince an entire population to engage in that sort of atrocious activity, you actually have to provide a moral justification for it. And that, I don't mean a moral it's a perverse moral justification, but they have to at least believe that what they're doing is in service to something that is good. And a key component of that is when you rob someone of their individual identity and then you give them a group identity. And now that group identity comes with group morality. And so now the things that you're doing in service to the group are good. And then you combine that with this idea of oppressor versus oppressed. And now I can hurt whoever I want in the oppressor category because they're evil and they're mean and I'm doing it on behalf of the oppressed. And you see this sort of logic manifesting itself all over the place when you look at these rallies, when you look at the way Antifa behaves, when you look at the way the sort of way that people engage with conservative speakers on college campuses, when you look at Hamas, right? It's amazing what can now be justified if the person committing the act is in the oppressed category, and the person and the person that is the victim of the act is in the oppressor category. And again, keep in mind that who falls into oppressor and who falls into oppress is somewhat arbitrary. Like the only real category or the only real qualification to fall in one or the other seems to be, do you submit to leftist ideology? If you do, you get the benefits of leftist group identity. So if you're someone, and there's someone out there, if you're someone that is part of LGBTQ, but you don't subscribe to leftist ideology, you're treated like a traitor to the cause. And in many cases, you're treated worse than somebody that is not associated with any of the groups on the left. And what he's trying to point out here to Kathy Newman is exactly what you articulated. It's this idea that, no, I'm not saying that the current people, advocating for X, Y, and Z have engaged in the cultural revolution of the Great Leap Forward like Mao did. What I'm saying is that the philosophy which informed those sorts of behaviors and led to the moral justification for those actions, right, bears a stark resemblance. And so if you don't want to get here, then you have to understand what led up to here.
And this is why it's appropriate to say that Jordan Peterson has taken the red pill, because in making that argument, he now realizes where the problem lies. The problem is not, as he actually brings up when he questions people on the left all the time, it's not at what point has the left gone too far. This is a question that Jordan Peterson actually brings up to people on the left all the time on his own podcast or in other interviews with people. He always asks them, I've never gotten a good answer on this. At what point does the left go too far? We know through history at what point the right goes too far, and we're bombarded with this all the time within our institutions and academia. We never get an explanation of at what point do the social justice activists go too far, or what point does the left go too far. But the thing is that even though he asked that question of people on the left, when he digs into it, he understands that the problem is not just the revolution's gone too far, or it's crossed, again, my sacred red line being freedom of speech with C16.
Yeah.
He stood up and fought that because that is a sacred red line of his, which is freedom of speech. But he didn't just say the left has only gone too far because they're attacking freedom of speech, which I care very deeply about as a college professor. Instead, he's making the argument that, no, the line of reasoning, it's not the actions of where they're going, it's the presuppositions of the left. Is the exact same type of presuppositions that, again, when taken to their logical conclusion, have led to the largest mass slaughter of innocent people in all of human history, period, the end.
That's the single biggest, that right there is one of the single biggest things I look for when somebody says, oh, they've been red-pilled. It's like, okay, did somebody just violate one of your sacred lines, or do you truly understand how a line of reasoning will lead to something? And that's the part where I think Jordan Peterson, definitely understands that and has done an excellent job articulating it. And you see several more where he's done a good job. And part of the reason why it is so attractive to people that are watching someone that was in one, had one perspective, one worldview, and is now transferred over, is because they're usually able to do an effective job of articulating what the other worldview was and what it is and what motivates it. And sometimes people on the right are a little bit too quick to give people that have supposedly been red-pilled kind of like leadership and authority within what you might call the liberty movement or the conservative movement, because we're just so grateful that you're coming over and you get it. And that's why it's so important to understand, no, but do you really get it? Right? Do you really understand it? And I think Jordan Peterson does.
There's two tweets that I want to pull up that also really drive this point home as we wrap up explaining Jordan Peterson's process of being on the left, getting red-pilled, and moving towards the right. This first one is 3 lines, but, quite frankly, he really drives the point home. He's retweeting a famous libertarian atheist, actually, who is well known for fighting back against some of the wokeism that you see within the scientific community. And this guy tweeted this news announcement that the American Anthropological Association would be holding a conference about why it's necessary to retain concepts like biological sex when talking about categories within anthropology. Who knew that you needed to
articulate
that biological sex is an important category to consider when conducting science? And Peterson quote tweets him and says, "God is dead, science is next, mark my words." What he means by this, and if you dig into some of the other clips that he's come out with in probably the last couple of years about the relationship between things like science, religion, culture, institutions, society in general, is Peterson used to be quite hostile to religion. And then he realized, I mean, you brought it up in your introduction, right? And then he realized that, no, this actually serves a very valuable function. And then he realized it doesn't just serve a very valuable function. It actually is the foundation in the West, certainly. It is actually the foundation through which we got the scientific revolution in the first place. And when you kill God, so to speak, to quote Nietzsche, we do not become enlightened beings all of a sudden where, we got rid of this Bronze Age mumbo jumbo and now we can all get together and explore the stars. No, instead we start questioning the basic scientific tenets that enabled us to become the type of civilization that we have, that enabled us to have this podcast right now, right? Yeah. To all the technology around us.
I think what a lot of people, and quite frankly, what a lot of people within the atheistic community have done a good job of doing is convincing people that science and religion are at odds. And I understand the reasoning that they're attempting to use on that. The problem is that I don't, first of all, I don't make a generalized argument for religion, right? I make an argument for Christianity. And the reason why those two things are not at odds and simply can't be at odds is because when you actually look at some of the principles, if you look at the presuppositions which make science work, it relies upon things like order. It relies upon things like induction. It relies upon things like deduction. It relies upon things like conducting experiments while at the same time being confident that the results are going to make sense based off of how the universe works and the physical rules and laws of the universe. None of those things are contradictory toward, faith or Christianity. In fact, I would argue that in many cases they're dependent upon it. Because if the alternative is everything just kind of happened by accident and here we are and once upon a time there was nothing and it exploded and now we're at this point, well then how can you actually be sure that what you're seeing or what you're viewing has any sort of like actual validity? Like is it objective truth or is it just your perspective? And that creates real problems for conducting scientific research. And so I think what Jordan Peterson is pointing to here is not just something of the problem with, okay, God is dead, science is next, looks what happened. He's basically saying that once you eliminate God and you put humankind or human beings in the place of God, as us being the only rational entities left in the world, well, now everything is up for grabs. And this is something that, interesting enough, and I am not a fan of Nietzsche understood this. Nietzsche understood that this was going to be a quest for power or a quest for pleasure, and that you could essentially rewrite the rules of everything. Now, where it started off was rewriting the rules of like things like sexual morality. Mm-hmm. It basically looked at religion and say, okay, well, here's all these things that have been hampering you or holding you back as a woman or as a sexual being or whatnot. And so now we're going to open up all fun land, right? Free love. We're going to open up fun land. But there was no logical or rational basis to assume that it would stop there. Because if the morality doesn't exist, well, then why do these other rules exist that are standing in the way of me recognizing my self-actualization, the highest form of myself? Because after all, that's it, right? There is nothing else. There is no objective morality in which to live my life by. So if I've decided that I'm a man when I'm actually a woman, if I've decided that these categories are nothing but social constructs and I want to completely rearrange them, and you say I can't, you're an oppressor.
Nick, the laws of physics and biology create brutal, oppressive hierarchies, and we need to tear them down.
Well, and that's one of the reasons why I appreciate it, because Jordan Peterson gets that it was this idea that God is dead, now science will reign, and no, it won't. No, it won't.
Every scientific discovery has come out of a religious tradition in the West. And here's the last thing that I want to bring up here, because Peterson has paid a terrible price for everything he's gone through. Not only did they throw the kitchen sink at him when he spoke out against C-16, not only did they basically try to cancel him whenever he came out and he spoke out against the logic and the end result of the logic. Again, we need to stress that. The end result of the logic, not from the beginning, right? Again, not just policy-wise, but from the beginning, the left's entire thought process is the exact same one that will lead to poverty, tyranny, oppression, right? He's paid a tremendous price for doing so. And recently, at the beginning of this year, he was basically purged from his own profession, right? Remember when it was a court in Canada effectively required that he go through re-education training because he refuses to bow down to, the left-wing Leviathan that's captured all these institutions. And so here you have another ideologically captured guy within the sciences, Mr. He, Him, His, over here, Tyler Black, tweeting, Jordan Peterson's not being silenced. He'll have a huge platform to say whatever he wants as long as there's right-wing grift. He's just being held, he's a licensed professional being held to a standard. And then Peterson tweets him and says, wait until it's your turn, buddy. And if you think there won't be, you're exactly the sort of fool you appear to be.
No, he's right. It's again, when we talk about the Leviathan always moves the left or whatever it is, it's this idea that you have these people that have confidently or consistently compromised on things that they used to believe in, and it's always this idea of, well, I'm being more tolerant now, or I'm woke now, or I understand now, or I see things that I didn't see before. It's like, look, if you think there isn't going to be a line at some point that they're going to require you to cross that you can't deeply believe in, the question is going to be, what do you do at that moment? Do you just continue to give up and compromise, or at some point do you take a stand? And when you take that stand, the very mechanism that you're now mocking, or the very struggle that Jordan Peterson has gone through, where they are now like challenging him and his licensure and his ability to practice, not because he doesn't have people that want to see him, not because he doesn't have people that believe in what he says and have found value from it, but because the state has decided, we don't like what you're saying, so now we're going to take away your livelihood. And if this moron doesn't understand that can be turned on you just as quickly.
It's not that it can. It inevitably will.
Well, no, the one part where it won't is if you are if there is nothing you aren't willing to give up or compromise on in order to make, and that's the thing. This is why Theodore Dalrymple, right? Anthony Daniels, I think, who was a English psychiatrist. This is why he said that the purpose of propaganda is not to inform, it's to humiliate. And he brought up this whole point of, and he grew up with a father that was a Marxist, right? So it's not as if he didn't grow up in an environment that was sympathetic toward this ideology, but he pointed out that if you can get someone to not only concede to things that they know are true, but if you can get them to repeat it, you make them a party to evil. And what you're slowly doing is you're eroding their ability to resist anything. And he ended that statement by saying that a society of emasculated liars is easy to control. And he came to the conclusion that political correctness works in the same way as more traditional forms of propaganda. And that's all Jordan Peterson is pointing out here, is that you are either going to decide that there is nothing in your practice, there is nothing about your understanding of reality that you're not willing to compromise or give up for, or just, mindlessly, slavishly repeat in order to keep that license, or there's going to be a point where you actually have to step up and now you will be the one getting steamrolled, and you're going to look back on this moment and be like, I didn't know they would come for me.
The left has gone too far.
Yeah.
This is an important theme that will pop up again and again and again in this podcast. And again, the fact that Peterson identified it and pointed it out is part of the reason why I would say that he has taken the red pill.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's move on to the next one. All right. This next person was quite a beloved figure on the left, especially here in the United States. He was an immigrant. Worked a great deal within the green energy sector, talked about climate change, offered up solutions for how we could address it. Identified as a progressive Democrat, voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016, endorsed Andrew Yang. He supported universal basic income, which is a form of like just mass welfare where the government essentially just pays you to exist, right? You don't even got to go through a process. You just get paid to exist. Voted for Joe Biden in 2020. Who are we talking about? Elon Musk, right? And this is another guy where it's fascinating because the shift was so drastic with Elon Musk. Like 2020, he's voting for Joe Biden. He's actively giving to, Democrat campaigns. And he's still on some level kind of a darling of the left. for Tesla and all of the other work that he's done on green energy. He's a big advocate for like, yeah, we can power everything with solar. We just need this much. And then within 12 months, not even that, within 12 months of him essentially coming out and questioning some of the things that the government was doing with respect to suppressing speech, all of a sudden he's a horrible right-wing nut job, fascist. There was this really funny tweet from Alyssa Milano, right? That sage of Hollywood, where she said, I can't stand all this fascism that's going on within Twitter now. I'm selling my Tesla and I'm buying a Volkswagen. It was like, oh, Volkswagen. You mean the Volkswagens, the car of the people? That was who was it that invented the Volkswagen? Oh, it's the Nazis. But there's
a reason Volkswagen in their ads about the history of their company, for some reason they never go farther back than 1945.
Yeah. But it just showed you like the ignorance of it. But Elon's like kind of red pill moment.
He actually tweeted in, I've got a few of his tweets pulled up. Here's one from May 2020 where he says, take the red pill. Apparently I liked it at some point.
Yeah.
And man, that got almost 500,000 likes. Like he started in 2020 was when he began to, as he said, began to take the red pill. There was another thing that happened too, not too long after that, where around the same exact time where Democrats started turning on him. This is a lawmaker. AFL-CIO union leader in California, former state assemblywoman, who in May 2020 tweets F Elon Musk.
Yeah.
And then he replies with message received.
Yeah.
And then it was like a month or two later, he announced that he was leaving California and moving to Texas.
Well, and then obviously the whole issue with buying Twitter and whatnot. And it was incredible because, again, this is something that I think a lot of the people on the left are starting to realize. And what they think is they have built up sufficient social and intellectual capital with the left by going along with them, by donating, by advocating for 85-90% of what they want. And then something happens, we're like, well, guys, I think this is a little bit too far. And the response from the left is never, okay, well, let's talk about this. We appreciate all the work you've done. And hey, look, we can have disagreements on this. And maybe there are some areas where we can come. No, it's F you, dude. You're now a fascist. You're a right wing, you're a traitor. That is the response, because the moment that you step outside of the orthodoxy, right, you are going to be destroyed. And the problem when you try to do that with someone like Elon Musk is he's going to be like, oh, F me? Okay.
He can punch back.
Let's play these games. You want to play stupid games? I'll help you win stupid prizes. And taking over Twitter ended up becoming this, long drug out battle. There was this idea of them joking about it. And then the UN comes in and goes, well, with that much money, we could cure world hunger. And he immediately goes on and goes like, send me a proposal. And then of course you look at the proposal and it's like, yeah, this money's going to get wasted on warlords. But the idea is that the freedom of speech, there was the Great Awakening. There was some of the things that were happening during 2020 where what it was violating for Elon Musk, as best I can see from reading him and listening to him and talk and seeing his tweets, was there were certain core fundamental components of being just a human being and an individual and a free person that he thought were sacred. And one of those was being able to speak your mind. He thought that was critical. And he was totally convinced that this was a left-wing virtue, that this was something that the left cherished. And what he started to realize is like, no. The left cherishes freedom of speech when they're not in power. When they're in power, they want consensus. They don't want you speaking out against them. Freedom of speech is something that they use to speak out against the right. It's not something that you use to speak out against them. That's ridiculous.
When they were engaged in the long march through the institutions, the left was in favor of free speech. Yeah. Once they took over the institutions, they were not in favor of free speech because it no longer served a purpose anymore. And the purpose is power. That's the thing that people need to realize, and people like Elon Musk have started to realize, is that leftism is not about love and tolerance and diversity and equity and inclusion and freedom of speech or freedom of press or association or free love or any of these other concepts, however vague they may be, that sound good. No, leftism is about power. It's about the acquisition and consolidation of power. And once it has power, it's not interested in anything that might threaten that power, which is why somebody like Elon Musk has gone through a rapid change. He went from 2018 to firmly being on the left and having, at best, very little ideological framework whatsoever, other than being vaguely on the left and being vaguely supportive of Democrats. I mean, his mission was mostly, I want to build cars and go to Mars, right?
Yeah.
And then by 2022, he's going out there tweeting about how Democrats are the party of division and hate, and he can't associate with them anymore. And for the first time in his life, he's going to vote for a Republican. And then he's doing other stuff too, where he's like, he's been repeatedly warning about what he has coined as the woke mind virus.
Yeah.
Like, here's a tweet from him from the end of 2022 saying the woke mind virus is either going to be defeated or nothing else will matter. And he is repeatedly, I mean, if I was to show every single tweet where he's made this type of argument, we would be here for hours, because he's repeatedly talked about how the primary issue now is between people who are pro-humanity and people that are extinctionists, as he say, because the left despises humanity and views them as cogs in a machine.
Well, and that
control.
And again, when we talk about that, it kind of sounds ridiculous to people. Like, what do you mean they despise humanity? But here's the important part. And look, I've researched this, and in a series of facts that I've made up just right now, what really caused Elon Musk to be red-pilled was the red meat from Good Ranchers. That's right. If you are looking for the true way to just find something that is going to give you the strength and the protein that you need to take on the challenges of society, you're going to need meat from Good Ranchers, all right? And right now they got a special deal. You go to goodranchers.com, you put in promo code Nick, and if you sign up for one of those subscriptions, you are going to get, for a year in every order, 2 pounds jumbo wings to go with all of your order. That's free. They just give that to you as a sign of their appreciation for you dedicating yourself to buying good American-raised beef, poultry, pork, and even wild-caught seafood. GoodRanchers.com, promo code Nick. Go on there and get the same steak that I'm pretty sure probably caused Elon Musk to change his entire worldview. Now, I can't confirm that. I'm simply stating it. So don't fact check me. But yeah, goodranchers.com, promo code Nick. Go in and check that out.
That was a good ad transition, Nick. Yeah. Here's the last tweet that I want to show from Elon Musk. This was a response. He loves replying to people. And if you see the type of tweets that Elon has been liking lately or replying to, again, there's no doubt this guy has firmly taken the red pill. Now, his motivations for it might be different than most people. It might have been because he had a lifelong dream that he wanted to pursue, and then the left went from praising him for it to attacking him and calling him a bad guy for it. Mm-hmm. And his motivations haven't necessarily changed. He's still who he is. But unlike a lot of these other people, he wasn't so firmly an ideologue that Elon is one of those people that says, I haven't left the left has left me. But, that's not entirely accurate, because he has actually changed some of his views. And here's a good example. Here's a tweet from Zuby, actually, a very well-known person on Twitter who has a pretty large following. And he brings up an important point that's similar to what Peterson was tweeting about, where he says, I don't think I've ever said this publicly and directly, but I think the West is absolutely screwed if it loses Christianity. Explaining this in full would require an entire book, but I've thought about it a lot over the years and reached this conclusion. It's like removing the foundations of a building, but pridefully expecting it to remain standing forever. All while enemies both inside and outside are trying to knock the building over. And then he has a long thread here where he talks about it. And I actually recommend that you take a look at it. But Elon actually replied and said, I think you're probably right. Yeah. And what's interesting is that if you go back to like 2013, about a decade ago, Elon was actually straight up asked, he gave an interview, this was 10 years ago, he gave an interview where somebody asked him, do you think science and religion are in conflict with each other? And he said, probably yes.
Yeah.
That's a big difference from where he's currently at.
Well, and I will say this. I don't think Elon Musk has arrived at the same place that, say, Jordan Peterson has. Although Jordan Peterson is also doing a lot to explore his faith right now. His wife really is. And his daughter is, Michaela is. We had a good conversation about that on her podcast. But I think what's going on here with Elon Musk is, I think initially what happened is the left Elon, right? That's how he viewed it. I think he saw something that was sacred that he thought was a left-wing value that he discovered was not under the right circumstances. And now I think because of the residual stuff that's going on, and probably because whereas Elon Musk previously I think was far more concerned about Mars and Teslas, I think he's getting more involved in kind of the philosophical discussions about what actually creates the sort of society where somebody can immigrate to a country and within a relatively short period of time reach a certain level of success and be able to build something that gives tremendous amounts of value to other people. Right? That's not an insignificant question, and simply assuming that it exists because it happens to is absurd. You have to ask yourself the difficult questions of like, what made this possible? It wasn't possible for thousands of years of human history. Why has it only been possible in a relatively short period of time, and what has influenced that? And what has led to that over years of trying stuff and human experience and human history? And so I think he's really starting to ask those important questions in a way that he didn't before, that he didn't consider before, because he had better things to do. Now, I don't think he's at the place where Jordan Peterson is. I think he's a little bit farther back in the journey, because honestly, it can't just be about economics, and it can't just be about individual issues where you think the left has gone too far. It has to be about that foundational principle that lays the groundwork for the sort of society that you want to protect and provide for. Because if you don't get that, right, you're going to get distracted, or you're going to engage in a certain degree of arrogance or hubris that is going to allow you to believe that you can tear up the foundation and that the walls will just stand because they've been standing for centuries.
Peterson recognizes the value of tradition, but I will say that I'm not prepared to say that Elon doesn't, because even though Elon is an innovator in many respects, in the sense that the stuff that he wants to see pushed, or you could argue that, there's Elon Musk is not a man of tradition at all. In fact, look at like Neuralink and Tesla and, the rockets and SpaceX and stuff like that. But there's something to be said about how it's not that technological advancement is at odds with tradition. It's that technological advancement is built off of the foundation that tradition provides. And so when somebody like Elon goes out there and says things like the woke mind virus is an existential threat to Western civilization and arguably humanity as a whole, his reasons for saying that might be because he wants to see humanity reach the stars. But what he's saying and especially in some of his replies to other people on Twitter, is indicative of the fact that he is starting to realize that it's not that the left has gone too far. Again, it's that he's starting to realize that the left is starting from a position that will lead to the destruction of all the things that he wants to achieve in life and that he wants to see humanity achieve in its existence. And so I would say that Elon has taken the red pill, but I actually think he still has further to go in some respects.
Oh no, I absolutely do. I think what some of these people have been able to distinguish is the marketing of leftism versus the practical application of leftism. And again, understanding what is the logical outworking of this, because nothing is easier than being a leftist and complaining about inequities in society when you're living in a fairly wealthy, fairly secure capitalist country that respects property rights and generally allows for upward economic mobility. Nothing's easier to sit there and point to some sort of ideal that has never existed and saying, well, that's what we should be doing and we're not, and so therefore there's something wrong with us. And that's why you don't see as much of this when it comes to people that are actually suffering under the sort of environments where leftism has truly dominated a culture and dominated a government. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to our next one. This is an interesting figure, popular for a number of reasons on social media, on YouTube, kind of within the gaming world, but was always kind of a self-identifying liberal from the UK. And that was kind of solidly where he was at. And again, like a lot of these other people used to make kind of, flippant remarks about conservative policy or religion or whatnot, right? We were all just, stupid people that were trying to cope. And so we used Sky Daddy to do that. And now Carl Benjamin, kind of better known as Sargon of Akkad on YouTube.
Listen to this clip that I've got pulled up here, because this is incredible. And I might actually play this just a little bit longer because I want you to hear the pushback, which I thought was really interesting. Just listen to this interview. It's really, really good.
Yeah, I have been called a lot of different things. I just call myself a traditionalist at this point. it's probably the furthest right you can go.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Because liberalism was founded in opposition to traditionalism, but I think that liberalism doesn't have a monopoly on the things that it claims, and especially in the English tradition, you can find all of these things. I mean, in fact, liberalism takes them from the English tradition, and so I'm just a traditional Englishman, and so I believe in all the normal things that traditional English people believe. But sorry, what was the question?
But it's interesting what you're saying, because I think so many people I speak to about very similar things have been called right-wing as an insult and as a slur, and I can understand why one might want to sort of take ownership of that. Like, well, it's just, it's no different to being left-wing except the other thing.
Well, isn't that interesting how the prejudice is to, oh, you're right-wing, as if that's an insult. It's like, well, what does that mean?
Well, people associate it with Hitler, because we learn more about Hitler than we do about
But
the
Hitler
Stasi.
was a socialist.
Oh, God.
I'm not even joking. He self-identified as a socialist. He ran a command economy. He had all sorts of abstract categoricals, and exactly the same way the socialists do now. He wasn't a traditionalist. A traditionalist is someone who doesn't think that they have a mandate for total control over society.
Oh my God. You could see that guy as soon as he said he was a socialist, like, oh my God. It's almost like, how could you believe something so stupid? Because I read what he said and I read what he called his party, and I looked at what he actually did with his economy. And this blows people's minds, because the accepted logic, the accepted knowledge on this has been fed through a particular lens. And the moment you actually start to dig in, I did this once at a college university. I did this at UVA. I had students there. I said, all right. I said, I'm going to read off statements from 4 different political platforms. And I want you to tell me left wing, right wing. And so I read them off. And then we got done. And I said, okay. And they had like 2 on the right wing side and like 8 on the left wing side. I said, okay. The documents that I read off from the Democratic Party platform of like Vermont, the Communist Manifesto, or excuse me, not the Communist Manifesto, the Fascist Manifesto, the Italian Fascist Manifesto, and from it was like the 27 points of the Nazi Party document. I said, not one of the categories from the Italian Fascist Manifesto or from the Nazi, the ones that I read off, were placed over in the right-wing category. Right? Because as you read them, you're like, this looks like it could come directly out of a Democrat Party platform or the Liberal Party platform in the UK.
Yeah.
And that blew their minds, because that's not the narrative they've been told. They've been told this is right wing. And why is it right wing? Well, because they fought the communists. Well, therefore it must be right wing. As if you can't have internal fights within similar ideologies. The primary difference between Nazism and communism was communism built into this whole concept, this whole Marxist concept of the idea of workers of the world unite and the complete abolition of the private ownership of the means of production. Okay, so what did Nazism say? Well, Nazism and Italian fascism believed that a factory worker and a factory manager in Rome probably had more in common culturally than a factory worker and a factory worker from Rome to Beijing. And so the way they organized their economy was not based off of, private capitalism. That's not how they organized their economy. They organized their economy, and Hitler was very specific about this. He goes, we will allow the national government, the government is going to nationalize that industry, which we have determined is critical to the well-being of the people. And then we're going to allow the private sector to do certain things, provided that they do it in accordance with our mandates and our directives. And provided that they do it well, we will continue to allow them to do it and to experience some profit from that, some benefit from that. And then when they don't, we will then nationalize it, take over, and do it for them. Does that sound like right-wing capitalism?
I really appreciate listening to that clip. And it was a bit of a long clip, but that is a huge, huge shift from where Carl Benjamin was 10 years ago when Gamergate was taking place. Yeah. His early videos, like his first videos that he brought up when he created his channel, even before he like revealed who he was talking about the Gamergate controversy. And he was like, look, I'm a left-wing guy too. I'm a liberal. I mean, he eventually revealed that he was an atheist and that he was raised one his whole life as one. But, he was like, I'm just a bloke from, Swindon in Southeast England. who has had, liberal views my entire life. And he thought he was very comfortable in that mold. And over time, he realized, no, actually, I'm not a liberal, because liberalism, as it's been manifested in the West, and certainly in the last couple generations, is, quite frankly, it doesn't lift people up. It just dissolves institutions. It dissolves social bonds. And those things are actually incredibly valuable. And so, like, now he's going out there, and the thumbnail for that interview was a picture of him, and the next to it is like, I'm as right-wing as it gets. It was like clickbait, right? But like, the reason I played the long form of that was because I wanted to get across that he gets it.
Yeah.
In the sense that, like, the pushback when he was like, I'm as far to the right as you can get. And the guy was like, whoa, hang on. That sounds problematic, because when people hear that, they immediately think of the Nazis. And he's like, no. The Nazis were socialists.
Yeah.
Hitler was a socialist. And then he lists it all off with, like, he had a command economy. Yep. He nationalized everything. He was a firmly believing socialist. Just because he was also a racist and believed in the priority of the Aryan people or whatever doesn't mean he wasn't still a socialist. And so when he comes out with these concepts like, I am a traditionalist, that is the fact that he calls himself a traditionalist is a huge far cry from the old days of 10 years ago, where he was like, I am a firm left-wing progressive liberal who just simply thinks that feminism has gone too far. That began the process. But again, he started off with saying the left has gone too far. And then if you listen to any of his interviews, and I have found him to be a very fascinating person because he has read a lot of material. He's a big fan of philosophy. Yeah. And when he gives interviews with people, if they allow him to do it, he will dig down into the philosophy of people like Rousseau and Voltaire and Locke and stuff like that. And he'll dig into the flaws of, again, people like Rousseau for sure. Yeah. He'll dig into the flaws of some of the things that came out of the Enlightenment period, of this idea that mankind is almost Homo economicus, and that all that needs to happen is we just need to mold him into the perfect human being, and that everybody's inherently good. And he's like, no, you're discarding some of these things that have, again, maintained society and Western civilization for thousands of years. It's Chesterton's fence, right? You're ripping the fence post out of the ground, and you don't realize that you're making a critical mistake. And so when you actually listen to some of his interviews, you can see that he has gone through this process where he has himself recognized, oh, I was wrong about this and this and this. And in doing so, by identifying the things that he was wrong about, he has moved so far to the right now that, again, he views the Nazis as being on the left because they're socialists. They want to craft mankind into the Ubermensch, right? Yeah. They want a command control economy. He recognizes the value of things that are hard to put into words, like tradition, like the family, like the church, like the nation state. He hasn't quite converted to Christianity, but if you look at some of his tweets recently, he himself has also said, it's almost like the modern day Pascal's wager, where it's like we're fighting against a force that is so obviously false and cloaks itself in hostility to Christianity that there's almost inherent worth and value in just converting just for that point alone. And the thing that he struggles with is again, that last final barrier. But again, he's one of these people that has gone through a remarkable transformation. And I hold him up almost like Jordan Peterson in the sense that he has gone very far in that red pill process. And in doing so, they have tried to character assassinate this man. If you go to his Wikipedia page, he comes across as this alt-right, hard right, lunatic who hates women. He's a misogynist, a racist, a bigot.
And he has, he did say some stupid things, but
when he was younger, he said some stupid things. But if you actually dig into it, like he debated Richard Spencer once about racism from a perspective of being against it. So like this guy's not this evil bigot.
No, he's not. He's not
colorful with his language.
Yeah, he's not an alt-right guy. He said some stuff that you would probably expect like a shock jock to say or whatnot, but. No, they've tried to paint him as an alt-right guy as a result of that, and which is absurd. It just I don't think there's there's no intellectually consistent justification to be able to paint him as that, except that again, when they say something that you don't like, you immediately get branded as the worst possible outworking of what you could potentially believe, and Yeah, no. So I think he's an interesting character. He might be one that some people haven't heard of on our channel. But yeah, Carl Benjamin, Sargon of Akkad.
I've got two last tweets that I want to show you
Okay.
that also kind of illustrate the red pill journey that he's gone through. So here's one. This was in our state, apparently. Virginia Elementary School to host satanic after-school program. And then he says, I'm not a Christian, but this kind of moral equivalency in transcendental questions is entirely the problem with materialistic enlightenment. If you declare that all transcendent claims are of the same character, you end up saying that God is the moral equivalent of Satan. And then there's one more tweet that he has where he has brought up that oh man, I lost it. So never mind. I guess we'll have to lose it. But if I ever find it, I will I'll pull it up and show you. Basically, he's brought up that I'll summarize it. He tweeted once that modern day liberalism, when it's divorced from any sort of foundational principles, Christianity being one of them, but it's not just Christianity, conservatism in the sense that people like you and I are conservatives.
Yeah.
When you divorce it from conservatism entirely, ultimately what liberalism will turn into is not something that lifts up humanity or frees them of the shackles of oppression or whatever. No, what it does is it dissolves institutions and dissolves social bonds.
Yeah.
And so this is how you get situations where, again, people will end up questioning things that 5 minutes ago nobody was questioning about, like the binary of sex, or about the value of the scientific method, or about the importance of freedom of speech, or free inquiry, or colorblindness, or any of these things that we traditionally hold up as liberal values. But when divorced from tradition, divorced from Christianity, and divorced from conservatism, well, those things fall by the wayside eventually.
Yeah. Well, April 2nd, I was on Tim Pool. And it was we kind of deviated a little bit into talking somewhat about this, the whole idea of objective reality and objective morality and what actually causes that. And I was making the argument that it's sources from the divine, and that when you attempt to remove that, then you can you still have a moral framework? Sure. Can you still have a framework for observation and perspective? Sure. But it becomes very, very difficult to categorize anything as objectively true or objectively moral. And the end result is that each individual now gets to essentially make up their own thing. And the only thing that stands in the way of that is force, right? So if I get enough people to say that this is morality, then that's morality and that's what we can enforce. But all of us kind of intuitively know that's not true, right? It doesn't matter how many people you get together and to say that, harming a child is okay. We all kind of intuitively know that no, it isn't. Just because you have consensus that it's okay doesn't make it okay. Where does that come from? What is the source of that? And, the problem that we're getting to, again, is that when you buy into this postmodernist view of the world where there is no such thing as objective truth, when you buy into this critical theory view of the world where everybody falls in the category of oppressor and oppressed, then you're going to come to some pretty logical conclusions that, well, everything is about consolidating power in order to protect your group against the groups that you've designated as oppressors. And since there is no objective truth and there is no objective morality, then whatever I have to do in order to do that, I can be intellectually inconsistent. Like that's that's level one. Conservatives sometimes get so frustrated, like I can't believe that they don't understand the inherent contradiction of what they're saying. That's because they are intellectually fine with contradictions, provided it gets them what they want. Now, they don't like it when they're presented with a contradiction that hurts them, right? But they're perfectly fine imposing them on you if it helps consolidate power. Because after all, you're the bad guy. Like, you got to understand, you're the bad guy. Bad things happening to you is just justice. And again, I think guys like Carl Benjamin, once they've been on the receiving end of that, because we have this problem where people are living in kind of the we're living off the fumes of a particular worldview that made the sort of society that we could grow up and have these discussions and whatnot in relative peace and prosperity possible. And now that they've started to separate the source of that, the structure's starting to crumble. And some people are looking around going, hey, the structure's crumbling. And other people looking at them go like, you're a bigot for saying the structure is crumbling. I'm like, no. I just think I'm notifying everyone the structure is crumbling. No, it isn't. You're an alt-right racist. And that's causing people to go, okay, wait a second. Not only is that insane, but something had to make that insanity so prevalent within society that this many people could repeat it and not see something that is obviously false. What is that? And what did we have before that like protected us from that sort of like group insanity? And those are the important questions that you have to ask if you're really going to be red-pilled instead of just sitting here going, well, they just went too far and I don't like it. And as long as they go back 2 steps, then everything will be fine.
Yeah.
Because then you don't fundamentally understand that it's always going to go in a particular direction. It doesn't stop until it's made to stop.
And that's why I included Benjamin on this list, because he hasn't just said the left has gone too far. That's where he was 10 years ago. Now he is, again, when you're calling yourself a traditionalist.
Yeah.
And you start off as a liberal, progressive, left-wing atheist. Like, that's a big transition.
That's a big transition.
He's fully taken the red pill.
All right, let's go with
next.
Let's go with this next one. All right, this guy was an evolutionary biologist, left-wing college professor. And I don't mean left-wing college professor at like William and Mary. Left-wing college professor at Evergreen State University. Evergreen State has a reputation for arguably being, if not the most left-wing college in America. Got to be in the top 10.
I think further to the left than Berkeley.
Oh, yes. No question. No question. So if you're wondering, like, how insane can a college campus get, look no further than Evergreen State University. And the thing is that he was a very happy professor then. I think him and his wife were professors there. And they would have considered themselves to be certainly left-wing. I think they still consider themselves to be liberals. But there was an incident. There was an incident that took place in, I believe, 2017, where there was this idea. So they used to have this like day of absence from Evergreen State University when all of, if you were a minority, I think if you were LGBTQ, like if you were anybody that fit within the category of a marginalized group, you didn't show up to campus that day. And that was everyone from like students to janitorial staff to, whatever. And the whole idea was to show like, this is what society would be like without us. And Brett Weinstein totally supported that, totally supported it. But then they tried to alter it. And what they wanted was to say, no, all the white people have to stay home, right? It's not good enough for us to be gone so you can realize what life would be like without us. No, we want you to stay home. And Weinstein kind of wrote a letter and he just said, look, I think this is problematic if you look at the reasoning. It is one thing to suggest that we all appreciate the contributions of people by their absence, right? It is something entirely different to tell an entire group of people based off of, essentially their skin color or immutable characteristics that you don't get to show up today. And that's changing that whole dynamic. And see what you see the similarity between what Jordan Peterson's problem was. It's not that you told me I couldn't say something. It's that you told me I have to say something. And that's problematic. So clearly they came back to Professor Weinstein and said, well, look, we understand that you've been a long-term committed liberal, that you've been a well-liked professor at one of the most left-wing colleges in America, and that you're just voicing a concern that all of us can potentially appreciate it as liberal-minded people, right? That is, of course, what they said. Oh, no, it is not. It is not what they said. The student body, there's a documentary that was done on this by another member that we're going to bring up later on this that I highly recommend you watch. I'll get the name for it here later, but they were talking about what happened. I think it was called No Safe Spaces was the title of it. And they were talking about what happened at Evergreen State University. And when you watch the videos for the sort of rallies, the sort of protests that were going on, you're going to look at this like, this is madness. This is insane. It was getting so bad that in May of 2017, student protests disrupted the campus and called for a number of changes to the college. They didn't call for changes. They demanded them. Weinstein refused to be forced off campus for a day when students demanded all white faculty leave the university. His refusal resulted in the mob coming after him, forcing him to eventually resign his post with the university. And then he became even more red-pilled after COVID because he was a huge critic of government response to COVID, the lockdowns and the mandates. But if you go watch the video, again, I think it's called No Safe Spaces. They didn't just like come after him on campus, like actually like meeting him on his way to work and like looking for him and like coming to his house. The student body had just become so radicalized that if you did not repeat whatever tropes, and oh, by the way, the university constantly gave in to their demands. Constantly given. So, of course, when the university gave in to their demands, they said, okay, great, thank you. We've reached some sort of consensus, and now we can move on from here. No. As soon as they met one list of demands, new demands were there because the revolution must continue. And I think Weinstein really started to understand that this is what was going on. And I think he ended up suing the university and winning a lawsuit, or I think he settled out of court. They settled out of court with it. But again, now he is one. We've got a couple of stuff. He started the Dark Horse podcast on his YouTube channel. He's one of the members of what was called the Intellectual Dark Web alongside Jordan Peterson. We've got a couple stuff from him.
Yeah, so there's a couple tweets that kind of bring up this trend that we were talking about earlier about how I didn't leave the left left me. So here's a tweet from him from a couple years ago where he's actually retweeting the host of the Young Turks podcast, who's very far on the left.
Yeah.
And Weinstein is kind of defending Joe Rogan, right? Because Sinek is, again, who's the host of the Young Turks. He's attacking Joe Rogan for Rogan saying, I'm still on the left, but the left has lost their minds.
Yeah.
By the way, spoiler alert, Joe Rogan is on this list as an honorable mention.
Yeah.
And Weinstein defends Rogan and says, Rogan is a liberal because he clearly believes in the things that liberals all fought for until yesterday. Values moderate conservatives now vigorously defend, such as equality of opportunity, meritocracy, a race-blind society, prosperity, a preference for peace, compassion, et cetera, et cetera. And then he has another tweet where this was more recent. This was crazy. This was a high school debate tournament that took place. And in the middle of the debate, one side basically brought up, oh, well, the other side's not allowed to make this argument because it's coming from a position of privilege. And they won the debate on that argument.
Well, here, let's write that. So what you were about to watch is the final round of the most prestigious national high school debate tournament. Team A proceeds to tell Team B that they will, quote, will not be debating the assigned topic. You just change it, dude.
Yeah. The assigned topic, benefits/costs of the IMF, because trans people are being genocided by MAGA Republicans, and that's way more important than debating the IMF. So they were given a topic in the final round.
When the worst part is the judge praised Team A for their bravery and courage and crowned them the national champions. So they won by refusing to debate, by declaring that trans people are being genocided by MAGA. That was they didn't even present an argument for that. They just presented it as a statement and said, and now we're not going to debate. And they won. Let's go back to the Weinstein quote.
This was insane when this happened. And then he brings up, Weinstein tweets this, and he says, if the woke revolution ended tomorrow, it would take at least 2 generations to clear the damage from the essential systems of the West. These kids are learning. They aren't learning how to think, but how to get what they want with credible threats. I wonder where he got that idea from.
Yeah.
Imagine you're on trial for a notorious crime of which you are innocent, but one of these kids, now all grown up, is representing you, but doesn't like your politics. Or the judge, the prosecutor, and defense attorney all agree that your adherence to some belief that nearly everyone shared at the turn of the 21st century makes you very bad. And so the facts of your case are besides the point, because society is better off with you safely locked away. This madness is already affecting the courts. At some point, it will dominate them. And there can be no West without impartial courts obligating to follow rules that favor no one. We must rekindle the West immediately.
Yeah. And here's the part. Like, I hadn't seen that final tweet by Brett, because a lot of the stuff I'd seen Brett said, I was like, okay, I agree with this, but he strikes me as another guy that the left went too far, and as long as they backed up 2 paces, he'd be fine again.
He's on this journey. He hasn't been fully red
pilled. Well, that tweet though suggests to me that he is once again recognizing that there is something taking place here, and that is far more existential and is far more fundamental. And this is always the issue, because you will see people, and again, a prosperous and safe society, start to entertain. They will start to reject the very things that made society prosperous. They will identify inequities or whatever it is. And instead of saying, okay, we need to correct this while hanging on to the principles which made it possible, because we realize that there's no such thing as perfection this side of heaven, but we understand that these principles have attained results far superior than what has been tried in the past. So we're going to conserve these, and then we're going to try to correct for the certain imperfections to the best extent possible without violating the principles. This is the important part. You have so many people that come to the conclusion that if there's any sort of inequity, regardless of how natural it might be as a result of individual decisions or just things that cannot be corrected for through laws or policy, they will come to the conclusion that, nope, it's the principles which must be flawed. We need new principles. And the new principles they always seem to advocate for is greater state authority. It's greater government control and manipulation over people's lives. Because after all, if only people like them were in charge, these sort of inequities would not take place, right? If only they had the power, because obviously they're the good people, they could thwart the actions of the bad people, right? But that's the non-negotiable. You got to give the good people the power. And when you approach them, you say, okay, but what happens when we give you the power? Let's assume that you are the good people. Let's assume you do these wonderful things. You're not always going to have the power. What happens when somebody else comes in? No. We're not going to worry about that. We're not going to worry about that. Well, again, if the fundamental principle is we cannot allow for this sort of concentration and consolidation of power, no matter how good somebody might be or how wonderful their intentions might be, because we know what ends up happening, both from the corrupting nature of power, but also from just the impossibility of knowing all the things that you need to know in order to make such complex decisions. That we value human freedom so much because we recognize that no one individual or group of experts or group of college professors possesses the knowledge necessary to micromanage the lives of millions of people, right? If you're willing to violate that principle, well, okay, we'll do it just once because we want this program or we want that program. It's like, okay, you're fundamentally violating something. And I think they're starting to get it, right? I don't think Brett's there yet. I'm going to be honest. But I think
no, I agree. I agree. In fact, Brett has come out, especially after COVID, and he has really tried to sound the alarm bells when it comes to what's happening within the scientific community, which makes sense because he's an evolutionary biologist. And he's brought up many of these same things about, like, look, we're seeing some real problems with the left attacking the scientific method in a way that back in the 90s, we thought it was going to be the right that was attacking it. No, it's not. It's the left is dismantling this because they think it's, oppressive power structures and patriarchy and white supremacy or whatever. And not only that, you're not allowed to question left-wing orthodoxy when it comes to anything about science, like mandates, right? Like the government response to COVID. Because if you do, well, that's very dangerous. No, inquiry, by definition, is a necessary thing in order to engage in science. You have to be able to question. You have to be able to ask difficult questions and challenge presuppositions, or else we can't go anywhere. And so
you just want people to die, Christian.
Here's the problem. Until recently, though, Brett was correct in sounding the alarm that this seems to be the point of no return. But what he doesn't realize, at least until recently, is that we were always going to end this way, because where were you? And I say this more rhetorically because he has started to recognize this, although he hasn't fully gone the direction that somebody like Carl Benjamin's gone. But like, where were you when this was tearing apart the fabric of society? Where were you when it was tearing down concepts like the family, like the church, like the nation, like tradition? These are the things that underpin, that allow you to engage in science. These are the things that allow you to engage in the marketplace. These are the things that provide for property rights. These are the things that provide for freedom of speech. These are the things that enable the constitutional framework of government that we have, that you say is so important and that I agree is so important. These things don't just pop into the ether through quantum fluctuations. They come from somewhere.
Yeah.
And we say that they're rights recognized by God, right? But again, they come from somewhere. They don't just pop into existence from, oh, well, we think that they're good ideas, and so therefore we're going to put them on paper, and that's going to be good enough. No, when you tear out the foundation, Christianity being one of them, but again, it's not just that. It's so many other things. It's Christianity. It's the family. It's everything that Benjamin brings up when his concept of tradition. When you tear that down, well, again, don't be surprised when at first it sounds like you're in some enlightened era, but eventually the things that you hold to be sacred, like impartial science, like freedom of speech, those things are going to go by the wayside eventually. And for a long time, I don't think Brett was there quite yet. He's starting to get there. And that tweet that I showed you earlier is indicative of the fact that he's taking the red pill. He's not fully... Yeah. He has not been fully red pilled, but he's in the process of doing it now that he's asking these really deep questions. So that's why he's on this list. Yeah,
when I think one of the things that is so appealing about leftist ideology is that whenever we point out that there's certain aspects of human nature, and that there's certain imperfections in the way that people just engage and interact with one another, and we say, and therefore you have to kind of hedge your bets. right? This is what Thomas Sowell would call the what is it? The conflicted vision, or there's the vision of the anointed, the constrained vision,
and the unconstrained
vision.
Yeah,
the constrained vision, or the vision of the anointed, is the other thing that he talks about. And so it's this idea that, okay, guys, we got to hedge our bets. So where are we going to hedge? Well, we're going to hedge in the favor of freedom. Okay, but some people are going to violate their freedom and use it for nefarious purposes. Okay, well, we'll set up systems in order to punish them for doing that, in the hope that that will, one, dissuade people from doing it that cannot otherwise be convinced that it's a bad idea. And two, if somebody persists in it, they will at least be separated from the people that do want to live in peace and cooperate and collaborate and everything else. And they're like, well, okay, but that's not good enough. We've got to make sure that person changes their behavior. We got to ask deeper questions about why. And for a lot of us, we're looking at that going, okay, we understand, and there's things that we can consider in order to try to make that a reality. But the constrained vision tells us that, again, we're not going to attain perfection. And the left responds with, yeah, but shouldn't we try? Just because it's difficult, just because it's hard, does that mean we shouldn't do it? And it's like, okay, there's a difference between striving for something that is great and good and noble and destroying everything around you if it doesn't produce your ideal, which has never been produced by anybody throughout all of human civilization. Right. And I'm not going to give up on everything that we've learned through human civilization because you think that the reason why we haven't attained this level of perfection is because we just haven't reordered society, or it hasn't been reordered by people like you. Because you're not the first one to come up with this grandiose idea. And it turns out it didn't work out so well for society. And that's the part where, again, I understand the temptation of this idea of like, but what if we could achieve perfection? Okay, at what cost? At what cost do you want to do it? And what we found is that the cost that they're usually willing to pay when we look at Mao and we look at Stalin and we look at others is
there's no
the
cost too great.
The cost that they're willing to pay is exterminating millions of people that they've provided a moral justification for because they're standing in the way of perfection. Of course, we had to think of all the people that would have benefited, the billions of people that would have benefited from these programs if it weren't for those people standing in the way. And so now they're willing to engage in some of the worst atrocities possible, not out of a sense of greed, not out of a sense of a desire for power. No, in seeking perfection, the greater good for everybody. And
there's no cost too great.
Yeah.
It reminds me of that quote by Jules Michelet that every now and then it'll be like every year or two you'll text me and be like, what's that quote about the French Revolution?
Was that Grandin that said?
And Jules Michelet, who's he was a French historian, he was talking about the trial of Louis XVI.
Yeah.
And Thomas Paine, actually, of all people, who was a radical that kind of lost his mind, he's one of these people that was red-pilled, and then he didn't fully take it and realize that he was actually going to be pushing for the very things that would destroy that which he cherished.
Yeah.
At the trial of Louis XVI, because after the American Revolution, he went over to France, right? At the trial of Louis XVI, he actually spoke up in favor of saving Louis's life. And he famously said, kill the king, but spare the man. And apparently that wasn't good enough for them. They needed to kill the man too. And this historian, Jules Michelet, writes that once we accept the idea that you can exterminate or kill one man for the sake of the happiness of the many, well, eventually, what's to prevent you from killing 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 1 million? And sooner or later, you'll find yourself sacrificing millions of people for the happiness of the many, and you'll think it was a bargain.
Yeah.
And again, it's what you were saying. There's no cost too great for utopia. And speaking of utopia, the ultimate utopia that's been proposed by Marxists is Maoism. And there's one guy that has really done a good job of alongside Jordan Peterson, of explaining the thought process of Maoism and how it has infected the West, I think, better than the next guy that we're going to talk about here.
Yeah, so this was another left-wing academic, big volunteer for Barack Obama, was a prominent member of the New Atheist movement, all of that, like solidly on the left. You would have not found this guy in any sort of right-wing circles whatsoever. And like I said, an academic. And then something happened. He started to notice something within academia because one of the things, and this is interesting because he talks about this in a way that reminds me a little bit about how Thomas Sowell walked away. Thomas Sowell used to be a Marxist. And they asked Thomas Sowell at one point, well, what caused you to move away from it? That would have been a good red pill candidate. We're not talking about Thomas Sowell right now. But he said, I still had a rigorous commitment to data and analysis and logic. And so when the data demonstrated what I previously believed is wrong, then I did the logical thing, which is I said, okay, that's not correct. What is correct? And I started seeing more data, and it led me down this route. I think that's kind of where this guy is, and that's James Lindsay. So James Lindsay became, kind of gained like acclaim when he did something called the Grievance Studies Affair. And it was him and two other academics. What was it? Pete Prigozhin and
Helen Pluckrose.
So here's what they did. They published multiple papers. So they wrote multiple papers, and what they were doing is they were noticing how all of these academic journals and peer reviews, that there were certain things that were going into them that just didn't seem to make sense, didn't seem to, live up to the sort of academic standards that James Lindsay thought was critical and important for, rigorous research. And so they wrote a series of papers that got more and more ridiculous. And here's the deal. They weren't just writing these papers and putting them out on social media. The whole goal was how many of their papers could they get published in what were thought to be rigorous, peer-reviewed academic journals. And the answer was several of them. And the one that really just took it over the edge. Do we have a clip for that?
Yeah, I have a clip from the kind of the documentary that they put up. So we're going to play like 20 seconds of it, and then I'm going to bring up the most infamous paper of them all.
Oh, this is nuts. All right, go ahead.
What appears beyond dispute is that making absurd and horrible ideas sufficiently politically fashionable can get them validated at the highest levels of academic grievance studies. We rewrote a section of Mein Kampf as intersectional feminism, and this journal has accepted it.
Okay, if you didn't hear that, they rewrote a section of Hitler's Mein Kampf as intersectional feminism, right? So they took out certain words, they put in other ones. Now, again, you're probably thinking, okay, well, did they substantially alter? No, the whole point is they wanted to use similar argumentation, but instead of making it about racism, they wanted to make it about intersectional feminism.
Here's the paper.
And it got accepted.
Our struggle is my struggle. Man, they weren't hiding anything.
You could have literally popped this in to like one of the many programs out there to protect against plagiarism and probably gotten notification that, hey, something's not right about this.
Our struggle is my struggle. Solidarity feminism as an intersectional reply to neoliberalism and choice feminism. And he brings up in that the last 2/3 of this paper are pulling from, I believe it was chapter 12 of Mein Kampf. And what they did is that they took chapter 12 of Mein Kampf, obviously chopped out a lot of words there, right?
Sure.
They didn't mention the Jew. Instead, it was the man or the patriarchy or whatever. But they took the exact same line of reasoning and argumentation and flow of paragraphs and stuff like that, and just tweaked the language as much as they needed to in order for it to fit into a framework of intersectional feminism.
Yeah.
And then they submitted it into this paper where, again, the title is like giving it away.
Yeah.
For those who don't know, Mein Kampf is German for my struggle. and it got accepted. And at that point, that's when they kind of blew the whistle because they were like, oh, we've got much bigger problem in our hands.
They had a journalist seeing these papers and seeing that had same authors and was like, hey, are you guys... Because I think it was, I don't quote me on this. I might have been a conservative journalist that kind of identified this as these papers all seem like being ridiculous and they have the same authors and they're getting published. Like, are you guys doing this on purpose? And that was the part where they came out and said, okay, yeah, we are. And it became this huge issue. And then, of course, the left immediately ran to, well, this doesn't prove anything. Or actually, it proves the very opposite of what they were trying to prove. No, what it demonstrated was that with very little intellectual rigor, you could put together, one of these papers and get it published in what was supposed to be a well-respected, peer-reviewed journal. Why? Because you had done incredible research. I mean, they had one paper where they were talking about, dogs at a dog park and the rape between dogs and how that was a part of the narrative for society. And this stuff was getting published. And so that's what they demonstrated. They demonstrated that as long as you were saying the right things, using the correct words, then you could get published for something that was essentially garbage.
And you know what he got in exchange for this? A ban from Twitter.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like Lindsay was heavily targeted. I mean, the left excommunicated him, right? Because he came from the left. He was a left-wing academic professor that was very active in the New Atheist movement. And then the grievance studies affair happens. And afterwards, he comes out and he kind of starts swinging against them and you know, kind of crosses their sacred red lines because he says things like, no, we are the enemy of this thought process. It's what Elon calls the woke mind virus, right? And eventually he crosses the red line because he said something like the transgender flag is a flag of an enemy ideology. And then they were like, well, that's hate speech. We're going to ban you from Twitter.
Yeah, you're gone.
And the thing is that Lindsay's kind of interesting, though, because he has picked many fights with people on the right as well. In fact, actually, one famous fight that happened at the beginning of this year or end of last year was actually with Carl Benjamin.
Yeah.
He and Benjamin did a podcast together, hosted by somebody else, where they were talking about liberalism in the center-left tradition in the modern sense, and because they both came from it, right?
Yeah.
And Benjamin was going way further to the right than Lindsay because Lindsay was like, well, I support classical liberalism. And Benjamin's like, but the problem with classical liberalism as we look at it is that it doesn't provide any tools for you to push back against wokeism because it creates an ideal to which you should aspire to. We need these neutral institutions, or we need these concepts and freedoms, none of which I think are inherently bad. But when you simply say, I support a neutral framework for us to engage in debate, but then you're debating with somebody who doesn't accept that and says, no, I want my framework and I'm going to impose it on you by force and violence and by cancellation or, again, literally through violence in some cases, then if the debate is simply between somebody that wants to impose their will by violence and somebody that simply wants a bunch of neutral institutions, the side that wants to impose their will by violence will inevitably win out because there's no mechanism to push back. And so they had some disagreements there, and then it blew up on Twitter, and eventually they blocked each other and stuff like that. Lindsay blocked Benjamin, but so the problem that I see with James Lindsay, because he started to take the red pill, but I don't think he's fully there yet. And here's the problem that I think that Lindsay has. And I actually highly sympathize with him as somebody who previously identified as a libertarian for, I mean, most of, you know me, right? Most of my years when I started, I remember the first time I joined a Republican committee and I told them I'm kind of a libertarian. And afterwards you told me, you're like, Christian, you shouldn't have said that. And I don't identify as a libertarian anymore, which is a whole nother whole nother rabbit trail. But I sympathize with Lindsay a lot. And I feel like that Lindsay is somebody that has he's taken the red pill insofar as he's realized that the left has lost its mind. And it's not just that they've crossed things that he held to be important, like academic rigorousness or freedom of speech and
freedom of inquiry.
And again, the scientific method. And maybe we shouldn't be pushing a hardcore narrative through grievance studies. And I'm in agreement with him on all those things. He's recognized that that's the problem. But he feels isolated and alone because he feels like that, I've discovered the solution. The solution is classical liberalism at a time when the right is starting to realize that classical liberalism is not a bad ideology, but if you simply say the only mechanism to push back against the left is we need to defend morally neutral whatever, then there's no mechanism to win. I will say this, though. In Lindsay's defense, because I really feel like the reason that he blocked Benjamin and got into this argument with, you've seen it lately where he's been pushing back a lot against people on the right, and he doesn't identify on the right. He identifies as a classical liberal. He feels isolated and alone, and I sympathize with him on that because I understand where he's coming from to a degree. I will say, though, that he actually, in November last year, he put out a podcast of his own on New Discourses.
Yeah.
And I actually recommend people take a look at it because he has some interesting stuff. And his definition of classical liberalism, I think, is something that can actually still fit within a traditionalist framework.
Sure.
And here's how he defines it. He defines it as, quote, the project of organizing our society from a position of political equality with certain rights that are inalienable. Among these, life, liberty, property, capacity for their use towards our happiness and purposes, and a reasonable expectation of privacy in which we may maintain their sanctity. I actually agree with that.
Oh yeah, I don't have a problem with that statement. I think what Carl was bringing up, and here's the deal. I agree with you. I think that Lindsay is very, very concerned, and we had this conversation with Rudyard from What If Alt Hist, right? I think Lindsay is very, very concerned about an overreaction from the right to where you have right-wing authoritarianism. And the part that I completely agree with Lindsay on is that I don't want authoritarianism from either side. And there are people on the right now going, the only way you can fight left-wing authoritarianism is with right-wing authoritarianism. Like, no, that's not true. But to Carl's point, and having not seen this interview or exchange, I don't want to put any words in his mouth. I do think the problem with holding up classical liberalism as the foundational answer is that it's not foundational. It's a structure.
It's a substructure.
It's a structure that has to be built on something else. So what is your foundation? What actually what says these things are actually worthwhile and good? And if you're just going to say human experience, well, I'm sorry, that doesn't work, because different humans have different experiences and have obviously come to different conclusions about it. What makes it objectively good? This is why, as much as people get upset with me about it, I'll never stop saying it. And I think Carl's coming to a similar conclusion, and certainly others, that Christian moral framework, which provides a body for objective truth and objective morality, is a firm foundation for which you can build classical liberalism. It is a firm foundation for which you can build it because it provides objective truth, objective morality. And then you can work from there. And you can work toward trying to achieve the closest to perfection as you can possibly get, with understanding there needs to be restraints on the people that wield power, right? Because it corrupts, or they could use it for ill, or it could get into the wrong hands, or whatever else. And so that's the part where I think Lindsay, and again, I get it. I'm sympathetic to this. He's had a lot of fights with the whole idea of like Christian nationalism. He's had a lot of fights with Christians that he believes, immediately throw him under the bus when there's any sort of disagreement. And so what it is his original frustration, I think, with the left was, again, not being able to have honest conversations and freedom of inquiry without them attempting to demonize him and throw him out. And so now he's rejected that, and he's come in and he's exposed a lot of it in very, very important ways. His new discourses, I think, are very good work. He does the best job of explaining, I think, intersectional politics as this form of American Maoism.
He gave a speech to the European Parliament on this that I highly, I
yeah,
don't
it's like a
actually
20,
have it here, but
22-minute speech.
I highly recommend it.
It was great. So he's done all of that. And then what he's seen is that on certain areas where he disagrees or he warns the right about potential oversteps, what happens? Well, his Twitter feed shows up with a bunch of people that are going to slam him for it, or going to say he's a traitor, or going to say he's this. Like, we've all experienced that, right? And so he's saying, well, screw you. You're no better. And what I would ask, James Lindsay, he actually, I responded to one of his tweets where I think it was a tweet or an Instagram post. And James Lindsay and I have talked back and forth on Instagram before. We've direct messaged one of each other or each other before. I'd love to have him on the show at some point. But he said something that, like, homesteading is just basically conservatives, doing anti-growth LARPing. And I responded to that and I said, James, I said, with all due respect, I said, I don't think you have as firm a grasp on this particular concept or topic or why it is gaining steam. And I did. I tried to say it very, very respectfully to him because, again, I think he is out there fighting and he feels like he's getting shot at by all directions. And when you do that, it can become very easy to focus your attention on whoever you think is hitting you at that particular point.
You become defensive naturally.
Yeah, and that's a natural response. And what happens is that you start to see certain manifestations of something, and there are people within the homesteading community that are just screw it all, off grid. Forget this. Any sort of industry is bad, and we need to get back to our natural roots of just small agrarian farms. And what I was trying to say is, like, you're going to find, like in everything else, you're going to find a wide spectrum of ideology within a particular group. I said, and when I look at the homesteading, I said, I think what you will find, and I'd love to invite him to like the Homesteaders of America. I think what you will find is you will definitely find people that absolutely believe we're all done, it's all bad, and we just need to do this. We need to go back to barter system. So you're going to find a lot of other people that what happened is that they saw how truly dependent they were on a supply chain, on the government allowing people to do things. And they looked at that and he said, okay, you know what? I'm not advocating no growth. I'm not advocating. What I am advocating is resilience. What I am advocating is that I never again want to be dependent upon people that seem to hate me or despise my values and my way of life. And I never want my kids being able to eat to be dependent on the whims of a government that would do something like that. And that's something where I feel like Lindsay would say, you know what, I get that. And so again, I'll bring that invitation up to James and say, like, hey, I'd love to have this conversation because, again, it's like anything else, right? People can always take things to a particular extreme that is unhealthy or is counterproductive. And I think he's very, very adamant about preventing that. What he is finding out, though, is that he's addressing the right, a large percentage of the right, at a time where they don't want to be lectured to anymore because they feel like all they've been is lectured to by the left. And now when...
And they feel like that the hour is late.
Yes, they do. They feel like the hour is late. We're on the verge of losing it all. And they don't want to be told, you know, hey, I have a disagreement with this 10% of what you said over here. Like, they don't want to hear that. Like, look, you're either with us or against us at this point, because we've had too many people tell us that they were with us only to either prove that they were cowards or traitors, and we're just done with it. And that's the part where, again, I would ask someone like James Lindsay, who I respect. I don't agree with him on everything, but I respect him. And I honestly believe this. I think he has done probably the best job of taking this mountain of information about DEI, ESG, social emotional learning that's going on in your kid's school, transgenderism, the takeover of the schools and institutions, Gramsci. He has done the best job of consolidating all of this into a single place where you can go to get anything from long form discussion to very, very consolidated bullet points. He has a series called Bullet Points that make it very, very attainable for the layman. And so I am a big fan of the work that James Lindsay has done and very appreciative of it.
I am too. That's why he's on the list, because
that's why when he says something like that you know that I would kind of take like, whoa, Haas.
Yeah.
My approach is not be like, well, screw you, James Lindsay. My approach is, James, I get where you're coming from. I can probably tell you what accounts you've been following or watched or responded to you. Please understand that there's something else here that I think you would find value in.
That approach is needed for these type of people that have started to take the red pill, but they haven't like fully taken it, right? Because in Lindsay's case, he's certainly started to take it. He's much further to the right than he was 10 years ago, right?
Yeah.
But he obviously hasn't fully taken it. And you know what? Not everybody has to fully take it in order to contribute to pushing back against leftism and wokeism. The danger is, though, when you don't fully take it and then you say, I have the solution, and you're leaving out important components. So in Lindsay's case, it's not that classical liberalism is the problem. It's that classical liberalism, when divorced from a traditionalist outlook or a conservative outlook on the world, does not provide any mechanism through which you can actually defeat woke intersectional leftism. It doesn't. You have an ideological, political, or economic structure planted firmly in midair, and it has to be grounded in something that is more than just the idea that, okay, yeah, we like property rights. Yeah, you have to be able to fundamentally and philosophically explain why property rights are an objective good, not simply a utilitarian good. And I think that's the part where a lot of these this is why a lot of these guys too started off kind of as atheists as well, and now they're really opening themselves up to this idea that, okay, yeah, I get the idea of the divine. I get why it exists. You even had one person that we're going to mention. Okay, we'll just mention her later. No. All right, I'll wait. I don't want to hold it off because that's like the last one here. Okay, all right, we'll do that one. But let's just say that there's somebody that you never would have expected kind of coming to this conclusion that there's benefits from this. So all right, let's move on to our next one. All right, so this person was elected to the state legislature. Elected to the state legislature at 21 years old. At 21, elected to the state legislature, served 4 terms in the House of Representatives, was the vice chair of the Democratic National Committee. Here's the crazy part. She resigned her chair in 2016. And you want to know why she resigned it? Because she thought her party was treating Bernie Sanders poorly. So she resigned her chair in order to endorse and campaign with Bernie Sanders. And it doesn't stop there. She also came right out and advocated for Nina Turner. And Nina Turner is someone that we have mentioned before on this radical left-wing feminist. I mean, just straight up Marxist in many respects. All right, and who are we talking about? Tulsi Gabbard, right? Tulsi Gabbard. Now, we did a whole episode right now on the phenomenon that's going on with Tulsi Gabbard, and I've actually had a chance to meet her. And I got to tell you, super nice person. Combat veteran, loves MMA. By the way, she does a lot of the Tough Mudder and some other runs and stuff like that. A very good person. But I had a lot of people like, you can't trust her. I said, guys, I'm not saying that Tulsi Gabbard has suddenly believed everything I believe about free market economics or about the dangers of centralized power with the government. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying though is that she went from a position where from the age of 21,
she was steeped in this particular ideology to the point where in 2016 she resigned a fairly powerful position in the Democrat so she could support Bernie Sanders, arguably the most leftist candidate that really had a shot at potentially becoming president in U.S. history, right? I mean, you had like Eugene Debs and all, they didn't have a shot, right? Bernie had a shot. And then within a relatively short period of time, and on October 11th, 2022 is when Gabbard announced on Twitter that she was leaving the Democratic Party, accusing its leadership of cowardly wokeness, anti-white racism, and being hostile to people of faith and spirituality and dragging us closer to nuclear war. She's actually Hindu as far as her faith is concerned. So that is a pretty big shift within a relatively short period of time because she endorsed Joe Biden for president. She ran in, she sought the presidential nomination. But I think one of the red pill moments for her, before we get into the whole wokeness, before we get into the anti-white racism and things like that, she had a real problem with U.S. foreign policy. That was one area where you saw kind of the libertarian wing of Republicans working with Tulsi Gabbard because she recognized, having served in combat and having served in the military, she recognized the problem with how U.S. foreign policy was going, not because she's necessarily a pacifist, but because she had a real problem with this constant interventionism, the problems with the military-industrial complex and how it benefits and profits through this constant state of war and conflict.
And remember, progressives used to be the non-interventionists in the United States. But what's interesting, and we've talked about this at length, how left-wing orthodoxy through the long march through the institutions have hijacked all of our institutions. Yeah. Well, the military-industrial complex is one of those institutions. And so you shouldn't be surprised when the left hijacks every institution in the country to include the military-industrial complex, the defense industry, that suddenly they have now become wedded to a neoconservative foreign policy. Yeah. What we now have is a neoconservative foreign policy, but not pushing neoconservatism. It pushes wokeism. Yeah. I've brought this up before, right? We're now queering the Donbass. Like we have... This is part of the reason why you see people on the left that are very hawkish on foreign policy now. Yeah. They're very globalistic in the sense that we need to be everywhere. We need to be defending democracy everywhere.
Lockheed Martin's their best friend now.
and we need to export wokeism. It's almost like export the revolution, right? But instead it's export wokeism to the rest of the world. And so if you come from a tradition on the left of being non-interventionist, like many old school progressives were, Tulsi being one of them, as you've seen this transition take place where the left has now hijacked, they went from being the fighting against the man to being the man. Yeah. And by being the man, they've now hijacked the military-industrial complex. Well, again, that automatically means they've now been wedded to an interventionist American foreign policy. Well, that doesn't mesh well with somebody like Tulsi, who naturally is inclined to be a non-interventionist on foreign policy. Yeah. So in some ways, that was the beginning. Now, that doesn't mean that you've now divorced yourself from all left-wing thought and you realize that, no, the problem is the left itself. Tulsi's one of those people that, in a literal sense, it's not that she's left the left. The left did quite literally leave her. Yeah. And so I admire the fact that she had the courage to come out and leave go from being a high-ranking person within the Democratic Party to leaving it. That doesn't mean that I want to hand her the reins of the Republican Party.
No, we say this before where it's like you'll have somebody that converts to Christianity and the next day they want to be the pastor. It's like, that's not how this works, right? And what I told people as well was this whole idea of, look, I'm not saying that I would vote for Tulsi Gabbard for president. I'm not saying that I would vote for Tulsi Gabbard right now. What I am saying is that I've seen what she's had to say. I admire the amount of courage it took to actually leave and do that. And having met her personally and actually spent a little time talking with her, I can tell you that she has struck me as an incredibly genuine person. And she's going through kind of an intellectual journey at this point. And it's unreasonable to expect somebody to throw out everything that they've believed in, fought for, gathered a significant portion of their identity from. And in fact, if you are demanding something like that, you're more likely to push them back into the arms of the direction that they're coming from. And so it's like, look, give people time to process. It doesn't mean you surrender. And yeah, if she stood up now and said, I want to be the Republican nominee for president, I'd be like, Tulsi, sorry, I love you, respect you, but no, And so I think it's important to make that distinction, but I do think so that she's someone that, and again, one of the things you see normally is this idea that people have a certain commitment to truth, and that their idea that there is truth, and that and their belief that they can that we can use processes to arrive at it. And when the data and the processes that you use don't arrive you or don't get you to the place that you thought you would end up, it is perfectly appropriate to readjust the way that you're looking at things. And I think Tulsi's doing that. So it's like, give people some time. I don't think people understand how powerful the concept of groupthink is on the left. Your identity becomes all of us do this to some degree, right? It's not like over on the right where we value individualism that we don't also fall prey to groupthink, or that we also don't like group identity, right? The whole point of calling yourself a libertarian or a conservative or a Republican or whatever else, part of that is group identity, right? It's finding your people. The difference is that the groups that we tend to join place a high value on individualism. And so you don't have to give up your individual identity. The group becomes a part of what you are. It doesn't become the majority of what you are. And that's not quite the same thing in many leftist organizations. Because they put such a high emphasis on collectivism, you have to understand that leaving that comes with a lot of consequences that are not just professional, they're economic, they're social. And so I think we should have a little bit of grace.
I think that somebody like Tulsi's only just begun to take the red pill, because there's a difference between somebody that like has fully embraced this, like Jordan Peterson or like Carl Benjamin, and somebody that has divorced themselves from the left, but they haven't yet crossed over to the right.
Yeah,
because and even if you cross yourself over to the right, the danger, and we're going to get to this later on, the danger is that you inadvertently pull the right to the left. Yeah. This is actually going to, trust me, once we get to the second group of people here, you'll know exactly what I mean. But there's a reason why Cthulhu is only swimming to the left. And the problem is that the left discards people, and either they walk away or they get kicked out. But then they don't become fully red-pilled and realize entirely the problem. And then when they join the right, what they end up doing, either intentionally or inadvertently, is that they pull the right to the left. And so what this does is that over time, it shifts the Overton window further and further and further to the left, which is why it's important. Again, it's not that being a classical liberal is wrong, right? Or it's not that supporting freedom of speech is wrong. Those are actually quite important. It's that freedom of speech alone, or classical liberalism alone, or even free markets alone, those are not sufficient to defeat the left. You're not going to defeat the left in the marketplace or just simply by speaking louder, because those things are substructures that you need a deeper foundation that actually props those things up and give them meaning and purpose and actually strength. And when you take that foundation out from underneath it, again, like you said, you firmly planted it in thin air. And then you realize, why can't we actually defeat the left? So the last person here on our list of red pill people, before we get to the interesting people that haven't quite taken it.
We've got a few more that are kind of like on the verge. They're playing with it. So in the interest of time, we're going to move some of these. We're going to move through this last one a little bit quicker so we can get to these last ones and go through it. But yeah, this guy was you want to talk about a former member of the left, like absolute ideologue and openly advocating for it. So it's not like they were just a quiet, leftist. They were on probably one of the most popular left-wing YouTube channels, and that was the Young Turks,
which we've mentioned before on
this. We have mentioned. We mentioned Sink earlier on one of his tweets about Joe Rogan. Like, Joe Rogan's not sufficiently whatever, and that is David Rubin. Right. So we're going to talk about David Rubin. Like, so a couple things. Rubin started backing away from both the Young Turks and progressivism in general when the network slandered David Webb. All right. So David Webb is a black man who questions the narrative that America is a white supremacist nation. Right. And Young Turks came out and called him the Uncle Tom of the conservative movement. So Rubin saw that and thought that was out of line. He thought that was out of line. And he didn't just think it was out of line. He thought that it was incredibly dismissive of somebody that was actually sharing information that David thought was valid points. Following this incident, Rubin watched an interview between Sam Harris, Bill Maher, and Ben Affleck, where Affleck attacked Harris and Maher as racist for criticizing Islam. So once again, what are you watching? You're watching two guys that are progressive, Sam Harris and Bill Maher, critiquing something that is part of the sacred, list of groups you're not supposed to critique. And any critique of a theology was sufficient for Ben Affleck to be like, you guys are racist because you're critiquing this theology. You're racist, which is kind of funny, right? Because a theology isn't necessarily, race based in and of itself. You can be any race and follow Islam or Christianity or Judaism or, Shintoism or whatever. He was finally, Rubin stated that he originally characterized himself as on the progressive left, but stopped calling himself a progressive in response to the oppression Olympics, in which victimhood is the highest virtue, and because the left now rejects freedom of speech. So once again, you see this common theme among all these guys where freedom of speech, freedom of inquiry was a very, very important component to them. And they did not like the idea of people being shut down, deplatformed, or inappropriately criticized, which is to say that if you say this, then I get to automatically call you a bigot, a racist, a sexist, or whatever. Instead of actually engaging your argument, I'm going straight to ad hominem attack. That didn't sit right with David. And then again, the victimhood being the highest virtue. This is, and again, keep in mind, David's gay, right? And there's things I don't agree. I've met David Rubin. We actually spoke together at an event once. Different main stage speakers, but I got a chance to sit there and have a conversation with David, and I found David to be a very, very thoughtful. We're all sitting around the table talking about things, and one of the things that impressed me about David is how apt or how often he would stop things and just ask questions, and ask questions of the people that weren't talking. Right? He wanted to get the viewpoints. It was funny. I was at this one event, and Gina Stauffenberg, who's my chief of staff, she was sitting there, and we're all talking, and David goes, "What do you think?" And we were talking about Trump and the good, the bad, whatever. And Gina said, I think one of the things that's so appealing about Trump is that regardless of all the other things you guys have been talking about, nobody doubts that he loves his country. And it was interesting because I saw David Rubin on an interview like 3 weeks later, and he goes, I was sitting at this event and I was talking with these people, and I asked this one young woman who was there, hey, what do you think about Trump? And this is what she said, and that really stuck with me. So again, I don't agree with Rubin on everything. Obviously, we have different values with respect to concepts of marriage and an IVF and a number of other things. But I do respect that he's someone that I think is seeking the truth. And obviously he's been a very, very outspoken critic of the left. And I think he is someone that from a political standpoint has definitely, taken on. He obviously doesn't agree with the same things that I do from a theological standpoint, or from a family structure standpoint, but he does appreciate, I think, a lot of the values and whatnot.
He is somebody that I would say has taken the red pill, maybe not all the way, but maybe like 80% of the way. And what I mean by that is, like, he left California. He's a huge critic of Gavin Newsom. He moved to Florida. He ended up voting for Ron DeSantis and endorsing him when he ran for president. And he's probably going to end up voting for Trump this year. And this is despite the fact that, like, he voted for Obama twice. He voted third party in 2016. He voted for Trump in 2020, actually. Not only that, though, that, like, you brought up that he's gay. Like, Rubin is a huge critic of Pride Month, the LGBTQ flag, the trans pride, progress flag.
He doesn't like the idea of it being used to essentially bludgeon everybody else over the head about stuff, or to kind of coerce companies into doing X, Y, and Z. I think one of my favorite things, I want to get this because then we got to move on to the next section, but he has warned about the demise of old school liberalism and former members of the intellectual dark web like Sam Harris. In the face of the woke left, here was his quote: "They've made what seems to me a very obvious fatal mistake, that you can use any of the tools of liberalism, of open inquiry, freedom of speech, respect for your fellow human beings, individual rights, that you can use any of these things to rationalize with the monster that is coming to burn your house down. And that's why we've seen, in effect, the liberals have no defense over this, which is why all of the liberal institutions are crumbling."
He's dead right. And the fact that he wrote that is indicative of why I think that he's started to take the red pill.
Oh, I think he's taken it. I think when it comes to like the political component and some of the philosophical component, I think he's taken it. I don't think there's any question he's taken it. Again, him and I are going to disagree on theology. We're going to disagree on some other aspects. But I disagree with Ben Shapiro about theology. That doesn't mean he hasn't. It doesn't mean he doesn't generally subscribe to conservative thought or even like
no. I really appreciated that quote from Rubin because, again, it encapsulates the difference between somebody that simply said, "I didn't leave the left left me." That's not Dave Rubin. Rubin didn't just leave because, I didn't like something with the Young Turks. Eventually, he ends up concluding, no, the worldview is incorrect. that I previously subscribed to. And the response from people like myself when they're presented with hard truths is simply to accuse the other side of being evil, bad people that we shouldn't listen to.
Yeah.
That doesn't cut it. And so that's why he ended up cutting ties with progressives and with the Young Turks. And then he slowly moved to the right, where he just said, well, I'm now center left. And then he was like, well, I'm a centrist, or I'm a left libertarian. And then eventually he was like, well, I'm just a libertarian. And now he's like, he said recently, this was like maybe within the past year or so, he was like, I feel slightly more comfortable just saying I'm a conservative now, which I never thought that I would say. And so, like, he's starting to understand that, no, the problem is not, again, where the left is going. That's obviously a problem. No, the problem, though, was the beginning of the problem is the revolution, not with the fact that they're chopping people's heads off. They're chopping people's heads off because there's a revolution going on.
Yeah.
And so, like, that's why he belongs on this list. And he's the last one out of our list of people that either have taken or are in the process of taking the red pill. Now we get to talk about the people that maybe in the future they will, but they haven't yet. And there's a commonality, there's a common theme between all these people that we're going to bring up here as to why they haven't yet crossed over. But you know what? Some of these people might.
The dam is breaking.
And it's indicative of, there's a good side of this, but then there's also a negative side, which is there's a reason why, again, Cthulhu keeps swimming to the left. The Leviathan keeps moving to the left. And the reason is because the left discards people.
Yeah.
And then they find no other choice but to go ally with the right. But in doing so, because they don't understand that the problem was not, it crossed my sacred red line. The problem was with leftism itself. And if they don't accept that and own up to the fact that they were on the wrong side until 5 minutes ago, what they're inadvertently going to do is actually cement the revolution where it currently is. And in doing so, shifting the Overton window permanently to the left. This is why the average conservative today holds views that the average Democrat held a generation ago. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't work in reverse.
They will effectively drag the right to the left, just in a slower form than the left would like.
So lead us out.
First one we're going to go with is Bill Ackman. So who's Bill Ackman? Bill Ackman is a billionaire investor and hedge fund manager. This guy was a massive donor to Democrats. So what happened? What was his moment? October 7th happened. Ackman watched with horror as his beloved alma mater, Harvard, ended up being taken over by delusional Hamas apologists who think all Jews are oppressors. So why is this so important? Is because, again, there's some people that they might have just said, okay, I'm not going to donate anymore, or I'm not going to assist anymore. This guy was a huge donor to Harvard. He actively went after this. He's like, this is unacceptable. And so he went after Harvard. He goes, in light of today's news, I thought I would try to take a step back and provide perspective on what this is really all about. I first became concerned about Harvard when 34 Harvard student organizations early on the morning of October 8th, before Israel had taken any military actions in Gaza, came out publicly in support of Hamas, a globally recognized terrorist organization holding Israel solely responsible for Hamas's barbaric and heinous acts. How could this be, I wondered. When I saw President Gay's initial statement about the massacres, it provided more context. For the student group's statement of support for terrorism, the protests began as pro-Palestine and then became anti-Israel. Shortly thereafter, anti-Semitism exploded on campus as protesters who violated Harvard's own codes of conduct were emboldened by the lack of enforcement of Harvard's rules and kept testing the limits on how aggressive, intimidating, and disruptive they could be to Jewish and Israeli students and the student body at large. Sadly, anti-Semitism remains a simmering source of hate even at our best universities among a subset of students. A few weeks later, I went up to campus to see things with my own eyes and listen and learn from students and faculty. Right.
This is the most important part,
I met with 15 or so members of the faculty and a few hundred students in small and large settings, and a clearer picture began to emerge. I ultimately concluded that anti-Semitism was not the core of the problem. It was simply a troubling warning sign. It was the canary in the coal mine, despite how destructive it was in impacting student life and learning on campus. I came to learn that the root cause of anti-Semitism at Harvard was an ideology that had been promulgated on campus, an oppressor-oppressed framework that provided the intellectual bulwark behind the protest, helping to generate anti-Israel and anti-Jewish hate and speech and harassment. Then I did more research. The more I learned, the more concerned I became, and the more ignorant I realized I had been about DEI, a powerful movement that has not only pervaded Harvard, but the educational system at large. I came to understand that diversity, equity, and inclusion was not what I had naively thought these words meant. We're going to cut it off right there.
Yep.
There's more to it. But what's important about this is, again, Ackman has not disassociated himself from the left or from liberalism. What he's identifying, and this is the good part, right? Because he could have just stopped at, I don't like it what Harvard is doing. They're allowing anti-Semitism to go through. I don't approve of what President Gay said before Congress. I don't like what's going on, and so I'm going to stop donating to Harvard until they correct this, right? He could have just done that, but he didn't. He actually took the time, right? Busy guy, took the time, went up to Harvard, spoke with students, spoke with faculty, and then came to the conclusion that, this is just, this is a symptom.
Anti-Semitism is the byproduct.
This is a symptom. This is not the ultimate thing which ails us. And he goes into the oppressor-oppressed narrative, which is absolutely essential to critical theory, absolutely essential to, wokeism. And then he goes into the whole idea of DEI, right? This whole component which fosters this, and which is also a byproduct of this worldview. And so the positive thing is he's starting to identify that there is a deeper philosophical underpinning what he has not recognized yet, right? And this is what differentiates him from pretty much everyone else we've talked to before, is that he has not understand that this philosophy is not a bug, it's a feature. It's a feature. And that's, when he understands that, then he's going to realize that, it's...
Then he will have fully taken the red pill.
This always is going to lead to that. There may be different manifestations of it. There may be different outworkings to it, but it always leads to this sort of conclusion because it's rooted in this critical theory explanation of the world, right? There's inequities, there's inequalities, there's bad, and it's all a result of, society, and society, what we currently have right now has to be replaced with this left-wing version of it, which is rooted in Marx and critical theory and postmodernism. And the only way that you're going to get to that perfect utopian society is that you have to actually fundamentally change human nature. And how are you going to do that? You're going to do it by dissolving things like the nuclear family, things like Western institutions, and you're going to replace them with something else. And what he's finding out is that Harvard is far along that path at this point.
And this is why he has not fully taken the red pill, because he's still trying to save Harvard. There is no saving Harvard. By the way, he's still trying to save the left from its own logical end state, which means that he doesn't yet understand, no, the problem is not that the left has gone too far. The problem is with leftism itself. Case in point, he's too busy trying to find a suitable primary replacement to Joe Biden within the Democratic Party to realizing, no, the Democratic Party is way too far gone. You're never going to pull the clock back and undo, put the genie back in the bottle and undo the woke DEI revolution that the left has authored into existence. Yeah. And so Ackman understands to a point what the problem is, but he does not yet understand you cannot be on the left and not be pro-DEI or not be pro-woke mindset or woke mind virus, however, as Elon coins it. And so he's one of these people that quite literally, he no longer identifies as a Democrat now, but he's still trying to save the left and still trying to save the Democratic Party from themselves. And he's still trying to save Harvard because it's a beloved institution that he went to school with and that he used to be a major donor of.
And I get it.
I get it. But that's why he hasn't fully taken the red pill, because he doesn't understand how deep this goes, and that you're never going to save these institutions that the left has hijacked. You can't pull them back. The best thing you can do is dismantle them or let them implode in of themselves and build something new that the left can't gatekeep and hijack and take over and then wield for nefarious purposes. And until you understand that, again, the problem is not anti-Semitism. The problem is not oppressor-oppressed mindset. The problem's not even DEI. The problem is the framework that enabled all of these things to eventually build off of each other. Anti-Semitism is the logical conclusion of DEI processes, which is the logical conclusion of an oppressor mindset actually put into policy, which is itself a logical conclusion of critical theory, which is itself a logical offshoot of cultural Marxism. Mm-hmm. And until you recognize that the problem is the Gramscian style, Duce style, cultural Marxism, long march through the institutions, and that there's no undoing that. They're simply waging war and fighting against that. You're not going to convince the cultural Marxist to not be a cultural Marxist. You can't do it any more than you can convince a Nazi not to be a Nazi.
I will say this. I don't think it's necessarily... I always, again, I'm the optimist, right? I always hold out hope for redemption. What I say is I don't like to say like, okay, this can't be saved. What I usually say is you have to look at the cost benefit analysis of how much time, money, and resources that you're going to have to put into fighting for an institution that has engaged that much ideological capture. And then you're going to have to make a decision, man. You're going to have to make a decision. Is this the best use of your time and resources to try to take this back, or do you invest your time and resources with something that is competing with it? And when I look at a place like Harvard, I mean, it breaks my heart too, because Harvard started off as a seminary, right? Like this started off as...
And at one point it used to be, rightfully so, it used to be hailed up, rightfully so, as the most prestigious university in the world.
Yes.
There was a point in time where it actually deserved that label.
Yeah.
We do not currently live in that environment.
And I get it, right? I get why somebody that has that much of a connection to a place wants to fight for it. I get it, right? Like I have a connection to the United States, which is why I want to fight for it, not just, pack up my bags and leave. And so I get that. But again, what people need to understand is like, okay, you need to have a practical outlook on what it's going to take to actually do that. And again, the fact that he's actually recognized that this isn't just anti-Semitism, right? Because what if it had manifested itself differently? And my answer to someone like, Ackman is, it did manifest itself differently in 100 different ways.
And he didn't notice until October 7th.
And then it got to this one, and now you're noticing it. But, and again, I think he's doing the important thing of understanding that it's so much bigger than just the thing that caused him to notice. And that's important, but not complete. All right, next one. So obviously Bill Maher, right? Host of Real Time with Bill Maher, very prominent figure on the left, very prominent atheist. And again, I mean, Bill Maher's a witty guy. He's an intelligent guy in the sense that, I don't agree with his conclusions, but I don't think he's stupid, right? And he makes some very, very poignant jokes and whatnot. And that was one of the things that was effective about Bill Maher, is that when he ridiculed the right, he found ways to ridicule them in a way that was that was funny and amusing, and it led to a great deal of popularity. He was also incredibly dismissive of things. One of the things that I think was an interesting moment with Bill Maher was in 2019. Dennis Prager was on. And this is one thing I've always admired about Bill Maher, is he's never been afraid to actually have people come on and actually discuss things. Dennis Prager came on and made this crack about men menstruating. And Bill Maher and Bill Maher's liberal guests started laughing at Dennis Prager, like, who's saying that? Like, that's ridiculous. Nobody, again, it's the classic line now. Nobody thinks that. Nobody's doing that. And they mocked him, and
Just
now,
wait.
But here was the important part, and this is the part where, again, Bill Maher deserves credit, is that Bill Maher was able to come back later and be like, oh, what Dennis Prager was saying was true. And
he's realizing too late.
From Bill Maher's perspective, he just never thought it could come to this. How could the party that he believed was rooted in science and logic and looking at all of these things, how could they possibly believe something so absurd? But they did. And so, but Bill Maher is another one of these guys that, there's a certain degree of animosity he still holds toward religion. There's a certain degree of animosity he still holds toward the right. And there's a great deal of his own internal identity that he gets from being on the left that I don't think he's willing to. So I think he is still dedicated to saving the left. But he at the very least, he does recognize that there is a fundamental problem here that is so much more than just a couple of isolated incidents.
Listen to this clip between him and Dave Rubin, actually.
Yeah.
Which I think encapsulates why he's on this list, but he obviously, and as we'll say in a second, hasn't actually like fully taken the red pill. He recognizes to some degree what the problem is, though.
Yeah.
Not that anything ever happens in one year, but he says 2015 was a turning point. Something to do with the phones and also like Gen Z. I remember talking about in the pre-2015 era, like talking about with people the idea that the millennials, okay, they're just too soft, and and it will switch back with the next generation. And of course, Gen Z was way worse. It only goes one way in this country, worse.
It only goes one way in this country, worse. Does that sound like the Cthulhu swimming left to you?
Yeah.
It's like he realizes it, but he doesn't realize it fully. You know what I mean? Like him saying this joke that like, oh, I remember before 2015 thinking the next generation is going to be a little bit saner.
Yeah.
No, because guess what? You've constructed and defended a worldview absent of objective morality, absent of objective truth, absent of even objective fact.
Yeah.
And you've ruthlessly attacked your entire career, built your career around ruthlessly attacking the right as ignorant, backwards bigots who don't know any better and need to be led by their better masters in coastal America. And then, lo and behold, you have inherited a tradition that is actually rooted in tradition, even though you've discarded the tradition. And so you apply these thought processes and logic in order to build your own career up, but you haven't passed on that tradition to the next generation because you ultimately don't believe in it. You're simply coasting off of it. And so guess what happens? The generation that comes after you doesn't believe the same stuff as you because you can't even articulate why you believe in these things. You just simply uphold them to be true because they're true. And so then the next generation after that actually views you as being a reactionary on the right. And then you're sitting there thinking, what? How am I a reactionary on the right? I'm on the left. You're just crazy.
Yeah.
No, what you don't realize is there's a ratchet effect in place, and it's always moving to the left. And as he pointed out, the next generation was even worse because it only moves in one direction in this country. And so, quite frankly, I actually have very little sympathy for somebody like Bill Maher because he has built his career off of dismantling the very things that he's now sorely missing, even if he doesn't fully realize it. He maybe half realizes it, which is why he doesn't belong on the list of somebody that's actually been red-pilled.
No.
What's happened with somebody like Bill Maher is he was perfectly fine with the revolution, again, until it got to his sacred red line. And then he said, stop, you've gone too far. Well, guess what? The revolution doesn't stop for anyone.
Yeah.
And you have now become the next person that the guillotine is coming for.
I got bad news, Trotsky. Like you're getting purged. All right, let's go to
He's
our...
not the only one, though.
There's
no.
Anna Kasparian. So also from the Young Turks. Maybe liberals serving on the Young Turks is a good idea for us long term. So she is a left-wing commentator on the Young Turks, far left progressive talk show. And so here's what happened. The first kind of like, I think, crack in the armor was when she said the left erased the concept of womanhood. Yeah. And the obsession with what she referred to as garbage identity politics. So there's been a couple of things. So there was also an issue with the squatting too, because she's looking at this as, wait a second, this person owns this property. You're telling me people just come in and take it and you've got to go through this long bureaucratic problem for it. There was another one that came up that I also thought was interesting. And when she was talking about like homelessness in California, and then she was reviewing the amount of money that went to these NGOs that were politically connected. And she was saying, it's like, this is ridiculous. Like we've spent the equivalent of like hundreds of thousands of dollars per homeless person. And yet, it hasn't helped, probably not hundreds of thousands, but you get the point. And so she's starting to realize a couple of things. Here's the problem though. So the womanhood is a classic case of, this was my issue because I'm a woman and I believe in feminism. And now you're telling me that I'm not even a thing. And then she got upset with this thing. She's like, don't call me cis. Like I'm a woman. And the trans community, because that's the one, again, the left has no use for white men until we put on a dress and then we're the most important people in their coalition. They came after her. And so here she is like a minority woman, like, what? Like, what do you mean I can't say, don't call me a cis woman, I'm a woman? She goes, I can still support you and what you want to do, but don't create some sort of special name for me. And I think that she even went so far as to say, like, didn't you even say you're a woman? Like, okay, well, I am too. Don't call me something special. That wasn't good enough, right? And right off the bat, she realized that she got attacked pretty hard for that. The other thing that I give Anna credit for is she's willing to go on places like Ben Shapiro and have good discussions with people. Now, I had people get mad at me because I kind of called out Anna when she was talking about this whole thing with feminism. And I said, oh, is somebody dealing with the consequences of their actions?
She deserves to be called out, though.
Well, and the thing is people are like, why are you going to trash people that are starting to see the light? I'm like, well, because I'm not convinced she is yet. And because I don't want it to be something where, to your point, this isn't just the crazies. There's something inherent in the ideology you've been pushing that leads to this logically. And that's the part that I want him to see is the logical outworking of what they've been pushing, that this isn't just some, abnormality. Again, not a bug, it's a feature.
It's a big gap between where Bill Maher or Anna Kasparian is and where somebody like Jordan Peterson or Carl Benjamin is. Because those two people have dug into the philosophy, dug into the history, and have recognized, oh, this thought process that I used to uphold has a natural end state that will be the zombie apocalypse or
Yeah.
the complete collapse of Western civilization. And meanwhile, people like Bill Maher and Anna Kasparian are simply standing in front of the revolution saying, stop, you've gone too far. And they don't realize, no, again, the problem is not the revolution's gone too far. The problem is with the revolution itself dismantling everything before your sacred red line, which, by the way, includes things that you previously didn't uphold as sacred.
Yeah.
Guess what? It actually was sacred.
Yeah. Well, and this is interesting because there's things. Anna Kasparian praises Ron DeSantis in Florida for passing anti-squatter bill and criticizes New York and California for sitting on their asses and doing nothing about it. She undercuts the premise when she says, we don't know how widespread squatting really is. Now, here's what I'll say.
She quoted this, and then they blocked her, which is why you can't see it here. But then she said, thanks for the free publicity. Yes, the bipartisan bill that DeSantis just signed protecting homeowners from thieves and squatters should be commended. And it's funny because, again, it's this constant process where these people who firmly identified as being on the left for so long are one by one, they're starting to realize that they get betrayed.
Well, and this is the part too that I think is a warning for us, right? Because you're starting to see it with James Lindsay, where he's like, I'm on your side. What are you guys doing? And part of it's like, okay, James, we get that you're on our side now. You weren't before. Like, give it a little bit of time, and also understand that you are now talking. You have recognized these frustrations over the last 4 years. These people have been dealing with them for the last 3 decades, right? So there's a difference. The other part is with like kind of I think what is happening is prominent people on the left, like Anna Kasparian, has every right. You would think, if you're a logical, thinking person, you'd have every right. Anna has some expectation of not being immediately thrown overboard or thrown under the bus when she happens to disagree with something. And what she's learning is, no, they don't tolerate that. And you created because you never tolerated it, now you're not being tolerated either. You're right. Turns out the group of tolerance didn't really believe in it. And you're now feeling the pain of that. And I don't know how much greater the pain is going to have to get, because that's what I think this comes down to. And it's also a question of how accepting the right will be. I don't think she's quite there, but things keep happening because the response from a lot of people that you get on the left when they bump into their own side for the first time and they get trashed, and you see those Hollywood people all the time, like, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean for my comment. You see this with athletes. I did not mean for my comments to cause such pain to various marginalized groups. And it's like they're reading off of a script, and then after that, it's like, I'll just shut up and do what I'm told. Please don't be angry with me, right? Anna hasn't done that. Anna continues to bring up points that she thinks is wrong, and I think each time she's hoping that she'll be able to consolidate enough people on the left that agree with her about that and fight back against this. Anna, it ain't going to happen. It ain't going to happen. You're either going to find a home somewhere other than the left, or they're going to eject you because they're not willing to tolerate the sort of dissent that you're engaging in. And you can say all day long, yeah, but I believe in, all these social welfare programs, and I believe in, tolerance and accepting people and letting them do whatever they want. And I believe in, whatever. Doesn't matter. If you're not on board with wherever the revolution is today, then you're not on board. And she's going to learn it the hard way. All right, another one.
She's not the only feminist.
Oh, yeah, J.K. Rowling. Mike, I got to tell you, J.K. Rowling the last 3 days has been my favorite J.K. Rowling. And the reason why is because Scotland recently passed legislation that essentially said you don't have freedom of speech anymore. Because if you say anything that could potentially cause like discomfort or mental harm to anybody within a protected group, which includes transgenders, you'll be investigated, potentially arrested, and charged. And so what did J.K. Rowling do? As soon as that bill passed in the Scottish Parliament, she immediately went out and said a bunch of things that would theoretically violate that law. Basically saying, she goes, you're honestly going to tell me if I say a man is a man. And so she did this, and she didn't just stop there. You go onto her Twitter page, and she starts to pull up a whole host of like examples of like trans women, so men pretending to be women who had raped people, abused people, who would then get put into, they discovered they were trans right before they went to prison so they could go to the women's prison. So they send a rapist to a women's prison because they discovered they were trans right before they got sentenced, right? That's sort of absurdity. And she's bringing all this up, and she's daring this. She goes, I'm out of the country right now, but I'll be back. And she's basically daring the Scottish government to arrest her for this. And immediately the Scottish authorities came out and said, no, we've looked at this and we're not going to charge her with anything.
Here's some of the tweets, by the way.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. She went for it. Like, we were talking about this with Tim Pool very recently. But the point was, and this was something that Tim and I talked about, was, they're not going to do it because it's J.K. Rowling. But they're definitely going to do it to somebody else. And that's part of the problem with these laws, is that you saw this arrogant member of the, I think it was an arrogant member of the Scottish government that got up and said, well, look, if you're not doing anything that's going to cause, mental harm or violence toward any of these people, then you have nothing to worry about. Oh, yeah, and you'll get to decide what that looks like, right, Haas? Right? You have nothing to worry about if you're not doing any things that the state does not like. Then what have you got to hide? Like,
you're not hiding you're not hiding transphobic tweets in your profile, are you?
Yeah. You're not doing any things that you do not approve of. Yes, it's like just nuts. And J.K. Rowling, I think, is again come to this point where there's two things that are being violated here. The primary thing for her is feminism. She is an absolute dedicated feminist.
And this is why she has not fully taken the red pill. I even have our links here.
Because even now, think about wait 1 second. Okay. Even now, look at what she's responding to them. It's all around the idea where she says if any woman gets charged with this or tweets something that basically says a man is a man, right? And a woman is, or a man is not a woman. Like if you do something like that, she goes, I will retweet it so they can charge us together. But she frames all of her opposition not based off of like a deeper philosophical problem with what's going on, but instead almost exclusively for how it affects women. And that's the reason why I have a hard time looking at it as being philosophically consistent and genuine, because it's almost as if like this was kind of a niche thing that didn't affect women. She'd be like, okay, fine.
Well, remember, she's a TERF, trans exclusionary radical feminist, which in the eyes of the left is a counter-revolutionary, fascist reactionary, right? And but the thing that needs to be brought up is she's still on the left.
Yeah.
Like, people forget that, like, J.K. Rowling used to be one of the largest donors to the Labor Party.
Yeah.
In fact, there's actually a tweet here in response to her saying, if the left's ever scored a bigger own goal than saying child safeguarding, women's rights, and free speech are far-right issues, I've never seen it. The idiots pushing this line are going to find it takes a lot of living down. And then somebody says, it must be infuriating to see UK Labour captured by this ideology. The same party that you were a loyal member of and donated to for years, for decades even. And this is why Rowling is not red pilled, because guess what? She's still on the left. Here's another tweet that really drives this point home. I say this as someone who's been on the liberal left all her adult life. Own goals don't come in any more spectacular than, quote, if you care about child safeguarding, you must be right wing. Guess what? I agree with the second part of her statement, but the first part betrays the fact that she still identifies as being on the left. She doesn't realize, here's what she doesn't realize. She doesn't realize that she is the author, no pun intended, of the very ideology and movement that is now eating her alive.
When you see this with that, like you see one of the responses here from Kit Kat with the trans flag in there. It says, using the age-old line of safeguarding children while you're actively advocating for their abuse does actually make you right-wing. This is the part where, again, we keep looking at these people and you keep trying to convince them. You think you have social capital with them. You don't. You don't. I'm sorry. You either buy into all of it or you don't get any of the protections. So any of the protections that you really appreciated by being a left-wing feminist, right? And they all cheered you, and that's all gone now. That's all gone now. And you're not going to save it because the revolution is already moving on to the next issue.
Here's another tweet from her. Like many women, in fact, this is a thread that's fantastic to understand why she's still on the left. Like many women on the left, I despair that so many self-proclaimed liberals turned a blind eye to the naked misogyny of the gender identity movement and the threat it poses to the rights of women and girls. And then she's talking about Matt Walsh, because it actually brings up to her, hey, you need to stop attacking Matt Walsh because he's actually on your side. And I'm going to read through this and then say something. And then she says, but a shared belief that women exist as a biological class and water's wet and the moon's not made of cheese does not an ally make. I believe women are susceptible to certain harms and have specific needs, and that feminism is necessary to secure and protect our rights. Walsh believes feminism is rotten, and his default appears to be denigrating women with whom he disagrees. He's no more on my side than the shut up or we'll bomb you charmers who cloak their misogyny in a pretty pink and blue flag. She doesn't get it.
No.
She does not understand. And you know what's interesting? You can say all day long, but I'm a feminist, but I'm a socialist, but I'm a leftist, but I'm a progressive, but I'm a liberal. But guess what? The left, and I mean the radical far left, however far the revolution is currently at on whatever the day of the week it is, they get to define the ideology. They get to define the spectrum. And if they say you're on the right, it doesn't matter how many times you scream, but I'm a feminist and I'm a progressive and I'm a lefty. You are now on the right because they have decreed you are now on the right. And this is part of the reason why we are living in clown world, because the right does not get to define who is on the right. The left gets to define who is on the right. Even if you don't want to be on the right, you get to be placed into the right against your own wishes. She doesn't want to be on the right. She vehemently disagrees with somebody like Matt Walsh, who, by the way, is actually correct on all this.
Yeah.
She vehemently disagrees with him, but guess what? It doesn't matter how many times she screams to the heavens and says, but I'm a feminist, but I'm a liberal, but I'm a progressive socialist, left-wing, whatever. You're on the right, even if you don't want to be, because the left gets to define who's on the right.
See, and she's going to try to approach him with logic. Well, no, but I identify as no. You don't get to play the I identify game unless you're securely within the leftist camp. The I identify game only applies as long as you agree with them and their political objectives. The moment you don't, you're a traitor and they will treat you as such. Like, how many times this has to be demonstrated before people get how it actually works? It's just nuts. All right, we got one more because we're almost out of time here. One more. All right, so this
is a big one.
This one blew my mind. All right. So, evolutionary biologist, militant atheist, one of the leading figures of the new atheist movement alongside Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett, and Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins just came out.
Do you just want to play the clip?
Yeah, just play the clip. Just play the clip.
This is insane.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a longer clip, but everybody needs to listen to this.
Well, I must say I was slightly horrified to hear that Ramadan is being promoted instead. I do think that we are culturally a Christian country. I call myself a cultural Christian. I'm not a believer, but there's a distinction between being a believing Christian and being a cultural Christian. And so, I love hymns and Christmas carols, and I sort of feel at home in the Christian ethos. I feel that we are a Christian country in that sense. It's true that statistically the number of people who actually believe in Christianity is going down, and I'm happy with that. But I would not be happy if, for example, we lost all our cathedrals and our beautiful parish churches. So I count myself a cultural Christian. I think it would matter if we substituted any alternative religion. That would be truly dreadful.
But which brings me...
Wait, pause right there. Yeah, it's like, I'm a cultural Christian, which is, I truly appreciate the entire substructure upon which my entire civilization is built. I just wish nobody would believe in it. And now that I've convinced all kinds of people to not believe in it, I think it's horrible that it's getting torn down and potentially replaced with something so much worse. Golly gee willikers,
like
Richard.
Islam or guess what? He brings up Islam, but you know what? Wokeism is filling the void that Christianity has left behind.
Yeah.
Like So here's another tweet from him that kind of drives the point home about what he's going through. What on earth happened to the academy? As Fareed Zakira recently asked, how did America's elite universities go from being, quote, the kinds of assets the world looks at with admiration and envy just 8 years ago to becoming objects of ridicule today? I actually quote tweeted him. I said, the academy as we know it was founded by Christianity, which you spent the last 40 years working to tear down. Did you honestly expect a house to remain standing after you tore its foundations out from under?
Yeah, well said. No, it's one of those things where they don't want to give any sort of real credit to, Christianity for providing a intellectual foundation and a philosophical foundation for so many of the things that they appreciate and love. They just assume that the structure can stand by itself. And then they remove that, and then they're shocked to find out it can't. Or they're shocked to find out that something immediately rushes in to try to fulfill it, to try to prop it up.
Yep.
And but I just, gosh. And again, I think that Dawkins is another one that it is so, ideologically committed to is atheism.
But you know what? He understands the exact same thing that Jordan Peterson and Carl Benjamin do, but he hasn't taken the opportunity to think about it in the way that those two have, because Peterson and Benjamin are both either atheists or they're more actually agnostics at this point. If you actually listen to interviews, they say like, I grew up as
Peterson, I would say, is probably more along like the lines of a deist at this point. I think he believes in a
Benjamin gave an interview to I can't remember who it was, a couple months ago, and he was being pressed. I think it was Laura Chen, I think, and she asked him about some questions about religion and spirituality, and he was like, look, it is objectively true that there is something metaphysical there, which is a big departure from materialist atheism, right? It's objectively true that there's something, and it would not be incorrect to say that there's a spiritual component to it. He still is struggling to articulate that into words and in the way that Christianity articulates it, right? But those two men came from an atheistic background and now understand, oh, wait, you can't have Western civilization the way that we've all grown up and enjoyed and benefited from without that foundational framework. And you can't simply say, well, we're just going to believe in it because it's convenient. It doesn't work like that. Here's another tweet that I want your take on, where I say, quote, I like all the benefits that religion provides, but I want to actively eradicate it from society because I foolishly think those benefits will still be around even when the thing that produced them is vanquished. People actually believe this. This is like saying you're looking for a roof over your head without wanting the foundation the roof rests on. Where the hell did you think the roof came from? Did you honestly expect the house to stand again after you tore its foundation out from under it? There's so many people that just don't seem to understand this. Nietzsche was right. Now we can dispute the reasons and motivations, but when he wrote in The Gay Science in what was it, like 1882, where he's writing with Thus Spoke Zarathustra, about how, I've come too soon. My time is too. In fact, here's what the direct quote is. I've come too early. My time has not yet come. The tremendous event is still on its way. What he means is, and this is kind of what the meme is getting at here. The meme is the atheist with the fedora hat saying, oh yeah, Christianity's stupid. So true. Atheism rules. And then he's staring at Nietzsche's God is dead quote. And what he's missing, what's flying over his head, is that what Nietzsche's trying to say in this line about how I've come too early, when he's warning about the death of God to the public, and they're looking at him like, what, are you stupid? What he's warning is that without a system of rules and axioms in place that religion provides, society will fall into nihilistic chaos. Look, there's a lot that I disagree with Nietzsche on, particularly the solutions. He was 100% correct with that warning. And I don't think people understand that when he was writing this, he's not writing this with glee and joy. He's actually saying this is a bad thing and it's a warning. And what he's trying to do is construct a pseudo replacement to something that he knows is invaluable, and that when it's torn out, when it's gone, everything that we conceive as Western Christian European morality that has given us things like the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, classical liberalism, free markets, property rights, freedom of inquiry, freedom of speech, the scientific method, all of these things rest upon this foundation that, quite frankly, so many people on the left have built careers out of dismantling and destroying, and now they're looking at the fruits of their labor and they're saying, oh my God, what have I done?
Well, some of them are. Others are just saying, well, this isn't what I intended. You should have done this. Like, oh, okay, well, you didn't actually provide a sufficient foundation for that to actually be achieved. Let's. I'm going to go ahead and sum this up real quick. Obviously, we've talked about this for a long time. This was
But I know that we're long on time. Before you sum it up, though, Nick, or maybe when you sum it up, a question that's been nagging me for a long time, as somebody who, you know me since I was like in high school. I did not go through this process that Dave Rubin went through, or Jordan Peterson went through, or Carl Benjamin went through, because I always identified as a Republican or somebody on the right. But my reasons for identifying on the right were purely economic. Like I read Hayek and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, free markets, Austrian school, this is the way to go. And so I was never a socialist. But I was on the left on many of these social and cultural issues. I might have not used the phrase, but like I was a social progressive most of my life. I remember arguing with you after you got elected. And I was like, oh, we need to pass, all these left-wing social progressive stuff in order to win the votes of people like me that haven't read Hayek yet. And I went through many of the same things that people like Peterson went through, where like I walked away from Christianity in my early 20s. I had a crisis of faith, and I walked away from it probably when I was like 21 or 22, and I walked away for like 5 years, and I just thought like my reasons for believing it weren't valid or weren't logical. I had no foundational reason to believe in this stuff, and so like I was firmly on the left in everything but the economics.
Yeah,
I was always on the right on economics, but I was very far on the left on almost everything else, culturally, socially, progressively, and as I've gotten older. And as I've walked away from Christianity, as I've come back to it, I now realize that, no, those things like tradition, those things like religion, the church, the concept of the family, these social structures, the nation state, like these things that are grounded in tradition are, you can't have free markets without them. Mm-hmm. We can't, man, it says in the Gospel of Matthew, man cannot live off of bread alone. And that is one of the truest statements ever written in all of human history, because we do not exist to just engage. Free markets are important. Property rights are important. I will fight for those until my last day on earth. But you cannot simply have a society that's just a free trade zone. Like these things that make humans, like social interactions with people, like family, like faith, like your country. When you strip those things away and you say these things don't matter, and they have no meaning or purpose, we don't become a bunch of Ayn Rand objectivist, enlightened, free market supporters like I originally thought. No, we become nihilistic, depraved, debauched, delusional lunatics. And so I'm setting all this up because I want to ask a question of you that I hope that you're going to answer in your conclusion, which is, there's a lot of people that they're in various stages of this red pill. They're either like J.K. Rowling, and they're trying to say, stop, the revolution's gone too far, and they're getting bulldozed by it. Or they've started to take the red pill, and they're like, I'm starting to question my previous worldview. Or they've fully taken it, but they haven't yet accepted, oh no, we've lost some things in the West that are crucial to the maintenance of a civilization and society. Or they've fully taken it, and they've owned up to the fact that I previously believed in the very things that have now contributed to the calamity that we're going through as a civilization. There's various stages for each of these people. What type of advice would you give somebody that's in all of those different stages? Because I feel like that somebody like Dawkins is in a different position than somebody like Jordan Peterson or Carl Benjamin. And I feel like they're in a different position than somebody like James Lindsay. But each of those people, I feel like there's a message that needs to be said to those type of people. And if we don't articulate that message and we don't explain what the problem is not DEI and equity. They're the logical end result of a much deeper problem. And if we don't articulate what that is, we're never going to save the West or civilization, let alone the United States, because that ratchet will keep moving to the left and it will never reset. There's a reason it only moves to the left over time, because the left gets to define the right. We don't get to define ourselves. So in your conclusion, I mean, it's an open question. I don't know what you'd say, but like, I feel like there's something that needs to be said to each of those different categories of people in order for us to address the 100-pound elephant or 1,000-pound elephant in the room that's leading to the disillusion of civilization or society. We live in an age of disillusion, and how do we fix it?
I think the number one question that people really have to ask when they're looking at this, and this is going to sound a little bit cliche, but I just ask people to think for a moment on what I'm saying. You got to ask, what is the source of truth? Now, a lot of people say, well, you got to search for truth. Okay, but what's the source of it? Because the source of truth is going to inform you about all of these other things within your life that you're striving for or that you feel is somehow missing, whether it's love, whether it's justice, whether it's identity, whether it's meaning, whether it's purpose, right? Because one of the biggest problems with kind of the Jordan Peterson, Richard Dawkins approach to this idea of the noble myth, Maybe it's a myth, but it has social utility, so let's use it. Nobody wants that. Nobody's dying for that. People want to know, deep down, they want to know what is true. What is true? And it's not good enough to say, well, okay, it's true that 2 + 2 = 4, right? It's not true that this is a table. Okay, that's true, but that's not what we're talking about. Because for some reason inside each one of us, there's a desire for something more than just feeding our habits or our wishes, or there's something more. We want there to be a truth. We want to understand it. And so you're going to have to start asking, what's the source of that? Because I don't think you're going to get that out of a materialistic approach to the universe where we all just got here by accident and here we are and we're just dancing to our DNA or our chemicals or whatever it is. And everything is stimuli response. Everybody knows that answer is not satisfactory, and everybody has some sort of longing in them for something more than that. Why? Why do you have that? Right? Why haven't you just evolved to just response to stimuli? Why are you seeking love and justice and meaning and purpose? And what sort of, that is an incredibly important question that you need to get to the bottom of, because it's going to inform how you feel about everything else. And a lot of people confuse having the desire for it as a healthy understanding of what it is and what they need to do about it. And the problem is that if you run off without fully contemplating that question and coming to a satisfactory answer that is intellectually honest and consistent, then what ends up happening is you're going to go around misdiagnosing a number of problems, both in your own life and other people's lives, and you're going to be constantly assigning the wrong prescription. And every time it fails you, you're going to feel a little bit more isolated. You're going to feel a little bit more delusional. You're going to feel a little bit more separated from truth. And then you're going to try to numb it. You're going to try to numb it through pleasure, or you're going to try to rebel against it through power. And so when you start to ask the question, why do I feel this way? Why do I desire these things? And what is the actual, and if I do desire these things, is there a source? Because again, I don't think you can answer it all just by like, one day there was an explosion and now everything exists and we're just trying to do the best we can with what we have. That doesn't make sense to most people, nor should it, because I don't think it's an accurate representation of what people are really feeling. And I think one of the things that I have found, again, within Christianity, it's not, I don't believe in it because I think it's a noble myth. I believe in it because I think the truth claims hold up. I don't just think they hold up because of archaeology or early attestation with respect to scripture, or that I find the arguments, convincing on some sort of intellectual level. I think there is something deeper there, that this seems to be the only thing that can properly answer it. And oh, by the way, when it is faithfully executed, I find love, I find justice, I find identity, I find purpose, I find meaning. I can make sense of the world around me, not just when it's good, but when it's really bad. And that's the part that I think that is missing from a lot of this. Because as we've said before, you can drive a car all day long. You can get the full advantage and benefits of driving a vehicle with having no idea how an internal combustion engine works until all of a sudden something breaks down and you don't know how to fix it. And it turns out you can't just say, well, we can just replace it with anything. No, you can't. There's something there that makes everything else work. And you should probably do a better job of understanding that before you start prescribing a bunch of things. And that's where I'm hoping this is going to go for a lot of people. But unfortunately right now, along that spectrum, so the very beginning of that spectrum is when something shocks them into realizing that things are not going the way they anticipated, or things are not being explained the way that they thought they had always been explained before. It's not, something hasn't worked. And their first inclination is, I want to believe it's just this. Who wants to believe that their entire worldview has been wrong? Nobody. Because that's essential to your identity. And so at this point, no, it's just this little thing right here. And then all of a sudden you find when you tinker with that little thing, it doesn't explain the larger issue on what's going on. And so, okay, well, maybe it's slightly bigger. Maybe it's these categories of things, or maybe it's just these group of people, or just this individual, or whatever it is. And then more and more you're going to find back. If you keep searching, if you keep diligently searching, you're going to find that, nope, it's deeper than that. It's more fundamental than that. You can't just chase truth. You got to chase the source of it, because that's the only thing that's going to provide you the sort of consistency that you're looking for all of those other things that bring life meaning. And that's what's going to provide you the ability to be explained, again, not only the good things and why they happen, but also the bad things and why they happen. And then you can start properly diagnosing and start properly applying the things that need to be applied in order to make it better. And so that's where I hope this goes for everybody that's kind of going through this process right now, for some of the people that's still on that process and getting closer and closer. There is a reason why almost all of the people in this, whether it's Jordan Peterson, whether it's Carl Benjamin, whether a lot of them, why they started off with, I'm rejecting Christianity or I'm rejecting this, but I accept that free market economics, I accept that property rights, I accept that freedom of speech, I accept that freedom of inquiry, I accept that all these things are beneficial. It's like, okay, so you're respecting the utility of these things. Why? Why do they have utility? Why does it work that way? Why does it seem that these things are higher level things to aspire to, not just casual things that we can pick up or put down whenever we feel like it? And that's why more and more of them are starting to come to the conclusion that, look, they're not ready to commit yet, but they're more and more coming to the conclusion that it has to be sourced from somewhere. If it's going to be objective, it has to be sourced from somewhere. And wherever it's sourced from has to have authority. And that's why I think they're getting closer and closer to God. And I hope Christ, because that's what I think God is when they come to this conclusion. All right. I hope that answered that question. I think the last thing that we just want to mention before we close out here is we got a little something for Christian, since it is his birthday. We are going to everybody collectively wish Christian a very.
Oh no! It's because I dragged this episode out too long.
This is from our second producer, Nate Clancy here. But you've got to blow out the candles on your very gooey, your very gooey cake.
This is great. All right, all right. I got to make a wish. Right?
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, it took two. That's that.
No wish granted this year, right?
We'll try again in the future.
Thank you, Nick.
Oh no, you got to thank Nate. Nate made sure to pick that up on his way here. But yeah, once again, I want to thank everybody for joining us. I know we talked about a lot of things here, went through a lot of issues. Hopefully you found it kind of interesting, kind of talking about the journey that a lot of these people that have featured so prominently on social media and just the media in general right now, on where they started, what was that moment that really caused them to question things in their life, and kind of where's their current status on this, and where we think they're going to go, as well as kind of being able to look out on some of those people that might be on the cusp. But the number one thing that I think has to be acknowledged with all of this is that when somebody acknowledges one problem, they really have to ask the question, is this a bug or is it a feature? And more of these people are starting to realize this is a feature. And the real question is, what do you do next? Because if you're just looking for another ideological home or a political party in order to seat yourself and you think that's going to be sufficient, I promise you it's not. It's one of the reasons why I think someone like a Bill Kristol decided, I was a liberal and now I'm a conservative and now I'm a liberal again. If you're not looking not just for truth, but also the source of it, I think you're going to constantly find yourself jumping from one group to the next group and finding your own individual identity lost until you actually find the true home for where it belongs and where it belonged in the first place all along. So once again, thank you very much for joining us. We hope this information was informative and helpful, and we look forward to seeing you next episode.